Ramzan Kadyrov, who has been referred to as Putin's most loyal ally for years, has been granted official asylum in the Gulf for his family. If the most trusted name in the palace is abandoning his security armor and seeking refuge abroad, what has been shaken in the Kremlin's internal balance? Kadyrov's move toward a Dubai-based residence and protection agreement signifies a serious breach of trust in Moscow's corridors. The heavy toll of the Ukraine war, the suffocating impact of sanctions, and political uncertainty have begun to unravel the links that were once deemed unbreakable within the Kremlin. In this video, we examine the details of the asylum granted to the Kadyrov family, how the Russian elite are lining up with similar requests, and the possible consequences of this development, from the North Caucasus to the Moscow Stock Exchange. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov is reported to have been granted asylum in the Middle East for his family. Kadyrov, known as one of the Kremlin's most loyal figures and even considered Vladimir Putin's spiritual son, has made a move that reveals a deep fracture in the Kremlin's internal balance. Because he too knows that Putin's ship is rapidly taking on water, and he has put an emergency exit plan into action to save himself from this collapse. Putin's invasion policy in Ukraine has dragged Russia into a quagmire, not only on the ground but also at home. Thousands of military personnel lost, armored units destroyed, warplanes destroyed, and Navy ships burned to ashes in ports. These were the visible faces of the war. Behind the scenes, however, the collapse was much deeper. Sanctions, capital flight, inflation, lack of technology, and the morale of society have turned into silent saboteurs gnawing at the heart of Putin's war machine. In this environment, it is clear that the Chechen leader has analyzed the situation well. Kadyrov is almost certain that the Kremlin will not be able to emerge from this wreckage. According to claims by the Ukraine-based media outlet Ice Stories and some Western journalists, Kadyrov's new address is Dubai, the capital of luxury, secrecy, and silence. When Kadyrov's alleged departure from the city first emerged, pro-Kremlin channels said, "Our leader is in Chechnya. Here's the latest video of the meeting," and released 3 months old archive footage. Internet detectives compared the angles of the shadows, the curtain patterns, and the phone models. This scene is old. At that moment, the false sense of calm was shattered. A convoy of 8 SUVs belonging to the Chechen elite guard entered the VIP hangar in Grozny. Diplomatic cases were loaded into the belly of an Il-76 cargo plane. Rumor had it that the cases contained cash in US dollars and Swiss francs, several hard-shell suitcases full of jewelry, and copies of real estate deeds prepared by European lawyers. In Moscow, the red lights of the emergency phones flashed. The Federal Security Service shouted, "Media manipulation." But that same evening, private jet traffic from the capital to Dubai increased by 180%. Flight radar data showed the tail lights of signals with the password GRO-DWC-DOH, while it was leaked that hotels in Dubai Marina with reservations made by Russian passport holders were 90% full. It may sound like just a luxury summer getaway, but the numbers tell a different story. In the last 5 weeks alone, Russian capital shifted to the Gulf reached $6.8 billion. Bankers are closing crypto-backed mortgages in a day. Anonymous trusts are being set up within 24 hours. Cash is flowing into ultra-luxury residences. But there is a tragicomic irony here. The emirate monarchy is an autocracy where legal security is elastic. The stories of business people who pop champagne in their penthouses one day and board a flight back home with no luggage the next morning after a phone call from the Kremlin are real and increasingly common. The Russian oligarchs, the economic lifeline that keeps Putin in power, have also turned their backs on Moscow. Patriotism has never been a source of motivation for them. Their homeland was limited to the passwords of their bank accounts. They got rich thanks to Putin, but they did not keep their wealth in Russia. Because in Russia, property rights are not guaranteed. They are considered a luxury. If the Kremlin gets bored one night, your wealth can be nationalized. That is why billions of dollars have been funneled to the West, to luxury mansions, private yachts, and offshore accounts. But the war has opened the West's eyes. The oligarchs are now under pressure, not only from their own state, but also from the outside world. Their assets have been frozen, their access to banks has been restricted, and investigation files have arrived at their doorsteps. On top of this pressure, the economic crisis at home is shaking the structure even more. This elite class, once the Kremlin's strongest supporters, is now deeply disillusioned. These wealthy individuals, who believe that Putin cannot win the war, are seeking salvation in other countries. The place where the oligarchs have turned their eyes is, of course, Dubai. The United Arab Emirates is a new oasis for today's Russian fugitives. Here, the oligarchs can hide not only their wealth, but also their identities. In other words, Dubai offers everything a kleptocrat needs. But this escape plan comes at a price. Because the UAE is not a liberal democracy. On the contrary, it is ruled by an authoritarian regime. And in autocracies, rules are only recommendations. If you cause trouble, or Moscow has a request regarding you, your residence permit, bank account, and real estate can be gone within 24 hours. This is the paradox Kadyrov finds himself in. On one hand, staying within Putin's sphere of influence. On the other, drowning with him as he sinks. Loyalty had become a necessity for the Caucasian wolf, but now the ship is taking on water and the pit bull's collar is coming loose. According to Kiev-based ICE stories, the Kadyrov family is negotiating protected residence in Dubai via Doha. Conditions? No political activity, no media interviews, not even a hunting rifle. In other words, the man who for years drowned out the sound of gunfire in Grozny is now willing to sign a silence agreement in air-conditioned salons in the Gulf. What does this mean for the Kremlin? To put it simply, one of the main rivets of a rusting steel bridge is breaking. Kadyrov's presence was both a show of force for Moscow and a whip to rein in internal factions. If that whip is not removed from its sheath, the anger that has been suppressed for years in the North Caucasus will be sprayed onto stone walls in the middle of the night in the form of slogans. Just as in the late 1990s, if the militias take to the mountains again, a significant portion of the troops Putin has deployed to the Ukrainian front will be forced to turn their attention to their own territory. Now listen carefully. An FSB internal report says, the loyalty of Chechen special forces depends on economic incentives and the personality of their leader. If the leader disappears, the payment chain collapses and loyalty ends. A footnote to that report shows that the civil unrest index across the country is 145% higher than during the 2011 Bolotnaya protests. So remember the crowds in the squares in 2011? Then add on top of that a chorus of anger almost twice as loud. How do people feel on the streets? A woman at the market in Grozny says, "I've changed the price tags 9 times. I don't know how much I'll sell it for tomorrow." A student interviewed says, "I'm maxing out my credit card to pay for an English course. Learn the language in this country, then get out on the first flight." A railway worker fears, if Kadyrov leaves, Putin will come and kick us out. Another asks, if he hasn't left, why are the propellers spinning at night? Rumors are the first sign of decay. So why take the risk when Dubai is so attractive? Because UAE prosecutors packed up risky clients who were political headaches in less than 48 hours and sent them back to Moscow via Ankara. There are many examples. Sergei Stormin was wanted on a red notice for fraud and was sent to Russia without seeing a court. Nikita Amarov, who made headlines with a $3 million crypto heist, was on a flight out of Dubai without his suitcases 24 hours later. In other words, if you are labeled as Putin's conscience bill, the blind sword of Arab law will quickly come down on you. Does Kadyrov not know this? Of course he does. But the network of lawyers in Abu Dhabi is offering this plan. The option of a Qatari passport through Turkish diplomatic channels, a third country route on medical grounds, or, alternatively, a long-term clinic stay in the Maldives. Money? It's in the suitcases. The truth is that the Gulf sees the Russian elite as a temporary cash register. Stay as a rich tourist. Don't turn into a regime crisis. Then, one day, take your assets and leave. But a suitcase as loud as Kadyrov's can never be moved quietly. Now, let's turn our attention to another picture. The Moscow Stock Exchange fell 3% on the night the Kadyrov rumor broke. Analysts ironically asked, how many points does a pit bull's itch score? The next morning, they saw the ruble test the 1/2 routine level. The central bank said that the market is volatile but under control, but spot gold demand rose 28%. On the bank's internal foreign exchange reserve screen, the dollar column flashed yellow. Currency risk premium alarm. This is the feedback between the numbers and the rumors. If the leader flees, money turns from paper into fire. The elite heard about this fire. In a 7-star hotel, an investor with a Moscow accent rushes to Arab brokers, saying, "Okay, brother, we'll take over the registration company and get you a guest visa." But here's the catch. The Emirates National Bank has added a high compliance risk label to Russian accounts. So, if tomorrow the Kremlin says, return this in exchange for the energy deal, the bank window could close like a butterfly. Wealth could vanish before our eyes. In this panic, the passport queue economy is growing. Applications for urgent expedited passports to the Ministry of Internal Affairs increased by 190% at the end of May. The fee doubled. Still, the queue reached 47 days. An officer says, "I'll get my family out, then I'll take care of myself." Meanwhile, Tsikhalov reports that 38% of Kremlin security guards have quietly handed in their passports. This is another link in the chain of loyalty.
Ух ты, ебать, урод! Вот это есть!
The Russian army's supposedly impenetrable rear lines are now riddled with explosions. In Kartsysk, east of Donetsk, a huge ammunition depot was first shaken by a single spark, then sent columns of fire into the sky in a series of endless secondary explosions. This depot, located 50 kilometers behind the front lines, was destroyed in minutes by Ukraine's precision-guided missiles, while just one day earlier, the communication antennas of the Russian 8th Combined Army headquarters in the center of Donetsk were dismantled by HIMARS rockets. This series of successive blows leaves artillery batteries without ammunition, armored units without fuel, and commanders without communication. As Russia loses its supply corridors behind the front lines, how much longer can its war machine remain operational? We now delve into the background of the destruction of the massive 5,000-ton Russian ammunition depot and the Russian 8th Army headquarters. On the morning of July 2nd, the Ukrainian armed forces carried out a precise strike on a critical target in the city of Kartsysk in the Donetsk region. The target was one of the largest ammunition depots in the area. The explosions, which occurred around 4:30 a.m. local time, were not merely direct hits. The subsequent chain of secondary explosions clearly revealed the presence of a large stockpile of ammunition in the depot. Within minutes of the first explosion, local residents reported hearing a series of explosions resembling an earthquake and feeling their windows shake. Satellite imagery and initial footage from open sources showed a massive column of flame rising from the center of the explosions, illuminating the dark morning sky. From time to time, sparks and flashes of explosions could be seen among the flames, suggesting that different types of ammunition were detonating one after another inside the facility. The area where the explosions occurred is located on the eastern outskirts of Kartsysk and is part of an old industrial complex that has been used by Russian military logistics for a long time. On the morning of July 2nd at 4:31 a.m., this facility found itself at the center of a 5-part ring of fire. The 19th Missile Artillery Brigade of the Ukrainian Air Force struck the target with 6 M31A1 GMLRS missiles launched from American-made M142 HIMARS launchers. The M31A1 was selected for its 90-kilometer range and 91-kilogram steel preformed warhead, designed to penetrate concrete roofs and create a shrapnel shower inside. 2 minutes before launch, electronic warfare teams working in coordination with the brigade jammed the Russian P-18 spoon-rest early warning radar in the area with saturated frequency noise, causing the Tor-M2 batteries to lose their lock-on window. When the first missile struck the northwest corner of the warehouse roof, the detonators of the stacked D-20 artillery shells inside were triggered in a domino effect. This was followed by the successive explosions of Grad rocket cassettes and 220mm Uragan unguided missiles. The explosion was so powerful that the infrasonic sensors of an American civilian satellite company recorded pressure waves 800 kilometers away. Within the first 20 minutes, the flame column exceeded 50 meters. The Ukrainian General Staff stated in a brief statement at noon that the ammunition storage area in Kartsysk has been destroyed with high-precision weapons, seriously limiting the enemy's artillery capabilities along the Donetsk axis. So how did the reconnaissance targeting chain behind the precision strike work? The 73rd Special Reconnaissance Group, which had detected heavy truck traffic in the Kartsysk area since the end of April, monitored the depot for 3 weeks with mini UAVs. When thermal cameras indicated in mid-June that active cooling systems were operating inside, it was reported that the ammunition stockpile had reached a critical level. This data was cross-referenced with the European Union Surveillance Satellite, SARLUPE. Synthetic aperture radar confirmed intense reflections beneath the roof metal. The targeting package was finalized on the night of July 1st, and the missile brigade locked onto a 4:30 a.m. time window when wind would be low and ionospheric turbulence minimal before dawn. In the final 10 seconds before launch, the GPS drill key in the HIMARS system activated the altimeter map block, causing the M31A1 to detonate its warhead exactly 2 milliseconds after penetrating the concrete roof. Thus, the munition created the widest possible shockwave effect inside. The powder and TNT-filled cassettes in the rooms were exposed to temperatures of 250 to 300 degrees Celsius during the initial shockwaves, triggering a cook-off process. This chain reaction of spontaneous explosions was the cause of the 8-meter-high flames. Russian media reported that amateur radiation measurements were taken in the area after the explosion, but no increase in nuclear levels was detected. Thus, the absence of tactical nuclear warheads inside was confirmed. The Ukrainian side, however, estimates that the warehouse contained 220mm Uragan rocket warheads, tank heat rounds, and at least 10 containers of propellant for T-62 main battle tanks, in addition to artillery ammunition. The total TNT equivalent of this mixture could exceed 2,000 tons. In other words, the explosion released energy equivalent to approximately 10% of the Hiroshima bomb. According to local sources, the facility had been filled with a large number of Grad rocket munitions, tank shells, and artillery ammunition in recent months. The former machine factory on the eastern side of the Kartsysk industrial belt had been converted into a regional ammunition depot for the Russian Western Military Group since February 2024. According to open-source satellite imagery, the complex featured a 180-meter by 120-meter enclosed warehouse building at its center, surrounded by 12 semi-open revetments and concrete-floored loading ramps. This scale corresponds to a 5th-class regional ammunition depot under Soviet classification, meaning the depot could hold approximately 4,500 to 5,000 tons of artillery and rocket ammunition when fully loaded. Field observers reported that, starting in early March, an average of 60 trucks were unloaded here daily, most carrying 152mm artillery shells and 122mm Grad rockets. The collateral effects of the attack should not be underestimated. After the ammunition depot was reduced to ashes, the Donetsk-Ilovaisk railway line was closed for approximately 7 hours because shrapnel fragments riddled a 2-kilometer section of track. It is estimated that Russian batteries on the Donetsk front, each firing approximately 800 rounds per day, will have fired 12,000, 15,000 while in fewer rounds over a 15-day period following the loss of the Kartizk depot. This means less suppressive fire for Ukrainian infantry on the defensive line and a wider time window for counterattacks. The targeted ammunition depot is considered a key link in the logistics chain supplying the Donetsk front, and its destruction could lead to a significant reduction in Russian artillery fire in the region, particularly in the coming weeks. According to initial figures from the Moscow front, the average daily artillery fire, which was 5,000 AS at the end of June, dropped to 3,900 in the first week of July. The downward trend directly confirms the ammunition shortage. The timing of the attack is also noteworthy. The beginning of July coincides with a period of speculation about Russia's plans for a new offensive in the southern sector of the front. In this context, the destruction of the ammunition depot is not only a physical loss, but also a devastating blow to the operational calendar. However, this attack was not the first blow in the region. On June 30th, another critical facility in Donetsk was similarly targeted, serving as a precursor to ongoing Ukrainian offensives. The target was a command and control center belonging to the 8th Combined Arms Army, part of Russia's southern military district. The operation was carried out using the high-precision HIMARS system, a targeting package created by combining satellite data, electromagnetic intelligence, and field observations from the front lines pinpointed the exact location of the headquarters. It was reported that air defense radars in the area were jammed and electronic countermeasures were employed prior to the launch. The missile strike on the command center hit its target within minutes. The first explosion hit the building's main communication and command room, while the second and third strikes targeted surrounding communication antennas, generator units, and signal transmission centers. This second strike was carried out with 3 M30A1 rockets, fired 17 minutes after the radar jamming maneuver. One rocket hit the main communications room of the headquarters. Another hit the diesel generator building, and the last one hit the multi-band antenna group on the roof. Footage shared by local residents shows that a large part of the building collapsed, a large fire broke out, and a series of small explosions followed, believed to have been caused by equipment and ammunition being hit. In a statement, the Ukrainian General Staff said, "This operation was carried out against one of the centers from which the enemy coordinated its attack and defense plans in the Pokrovsk and Toretsk directions. This effective pinpoint strike has seriously disrupted the Russian forces' operational planning and execution capabilities in the region." Military experts point out that such attacks on command centers cause communication and command and control disruptions that last not just a few hours, but days. This is because such centers are not merely places where combat orders are transmitted. They are also hubs that control electronic warfare systems, unmanned aerial vehicle networks, and advanced logistics coordination. What Ukraine is targeting with these high-precision strikes is not the Russian soldiers on the front lines, but the decision-makers directing them. This strategy reveals that the war is being conducted with a higher level of operational awareness, and that Kiev is now aiming not only to defend itself, but also to systematically paralyze the enemy's strategic decision-making networks. The General Staff statement continued with the following clear emphasis: "The Ukrainian Defense Forces will continue to systematically destroy the command and communication systems of the aggressor state's armed forces." This statement indicates that similar operations will continue in the future, particularly targeting rear headquarters, supply, and communication centers with Ukraine's long-range weapons. Ukraine's successive deep-range strikes are systematically weakening the Kremlin's economic resilience. Every fuel tanker destroyed, every ammunition depot, and headquarters blown up places a new economic burden on Putin's military machine. And this burden is becoming unbearable. Since the beginning of the war, the Kremlin has transformed the budget into a war economy. However, this transformation has gone far beyond sustainability. For 3 years, Putin's administration has been increasing public spending far beyond the state's real income, thereby increasing the deficit. The only source used to cover this deficit is Russia's National Wealth Fund. However, the liquid portion of this fund, that is, the portion that can be easily converted into cash, is rapidly dwindling. While official sources still report that the fund's liquid assets amount to around $30 billion, independent experts and Western intelligence agencies believe the actual figure is much lower. Some sources even claim that the amount has fallen below $15 billion. The critical threshold is $10 billion. If liquid assets fall below this level, the Russian state will be just one external shock away from a dramatic economic crisis. And this shock could come in the form of Ukraine's ongoing war of attrition or a new wave of Western sanctions. In such a scenario, either the economy will collapse under its own weight, or a chain of defeats on the front lines will accelerate the Kremlin's downfall. At this point, the threat to Vladimir Putin is not only economic, but also political. The oligarchs, who are the real power center and hold Russia's large companies and financial system in their hands, may lose confidence in the Kremlin leader when they realize that state reserves have fallen to dangerous levels. This is the moment when the throne is lost in autocratic regimes. Putin's loss of control could stem not only from military failure, but also from threats to the economic interests of his own elite class. For oligarchs, loyalty is limited to wealth. If the person at the head of the Kremlin becomes a threat to their wealth, the system will quickly move to replace him. For all these reasons, it is predicted that Putin will be forced to cut spending not in 2026, but much earlier. This process will most likely begin in the fourth quarter of 2025. In fact, available data shows that the Kremlin has begun to delay payments to some ministries and defense industry subcontractors and has suspended some strategic investments. This is a clear sign that the war has turned into an economic race. Putin's armored vehicles may be destroyed on the battlefield. But a much quieter, much more dangerous destruction is taking place in Moscow's budget offices. Ukraine, meanwhile, has undergone an unprecedented transformation since February 2022. It is no longer just a country that is resisting. It is a war power that is rapidly developing, adapting, and building an almost industrial war capacity. Right now, Ukraine's peak combat power is at a level never seen before in history. For the first time, it has received over $50 billion in direct defense aid from the European Union. For the first time, daily artillery ammunition supplies have reached 8,000 rounds. For the first time, between 10,000 and 22,000 drones can be produced daily. This figure surpasses the monthly production capacity of some NATO countries. For the first time, it has over 30 Western-made combat jets in its inventory and can monitor its airspace in real time with 2 early warning aircraft. This demonstrates not only technical capability, but also that intelligence and response times are approaching Western standards. The picture painted by all these developments is clear. Ukraine is approaching a strategic threshold in its quest to win the war. On the other hand, Russia's peak combat capacity has stagnated over the past 12 months. Some experts even suggest it has entered a decline. Militarily, Ukraine is rising, while Russia remains stagnant. These two trends will inevitably intersect at some point, and that intersection will determine the fate of the war. Putin wants to delay this intersection at any cost, because at that point, Ukraine will not only have technical superiority, but also psychological and strategic initiative. However, Ukraine is trying to reverse this process. It wants to accelerate the momentum of the war and clash while at the peak of its strength, for it can no longer allow time to work in Moscow's favor rather than Kyiv's. US and European intelligence services are aware of this reality. They know that Putin is nearing the end of the runway. It is no longer a secret that the Russian war machine has passed its peak and that its current capacity is unsustainable. If the US, together with Europe, enforces the oil price cap more strictly, expands secondary sanctions, and puts more pressure on the Russian energy sector, the war will most likely come to an end. However, these steps have not yet been taken. Therefore, it is unrealistic to wait for Russia to collapse on its own for the war to end. Yes, the Russian economy is vulnerable. Yes, it is fragile in the face of external shocks and geopolitical upheavals. However, without a trigger, the system will not simply collapse. It needs a controlled but decisive push. Putin is well aware of this equation. That is why, even if there are only a few coins left in his budget, he is looking for ways to spend them carefully. He will reduce spending below state revenues and adopt an economic model committed to keeping the war machine running, even at the expense of cutting social budgets. He will transform the Russian economy into a permanent war economy. Just as in the final days of the Soviet Union, a delicate balance will be established between scarcity and the collapse of the system. Eat grass, but stay at the front. This is the roadmap Putin has drawn for the average Russian citizen. Those who will eat grass will be the large patriotic masses. The quality of life for millions of people across the vast territories stretching from the Caucasus to Siberia will decline further. But the situation inside the Kremlin will be different. Luxurious tables, imported wines, private servants, and sterile residences will still be there. Sacrifice for the motherland will only be for ordinary citizens. Because for Putin, the issue is no longer just Ukraine. The issue is how and for how long he can maintain his power. That is why he will now try to run the state on a shoestring budget. To avoid massive budget deficits, he will delay salary payments, cut funds allocated to municipalities, and condemn all sectors except the defense industry to resource deprivation. But what about war expenditures? They will continue until the last breath. Because for Putin, this is not just a war. It is also a struggle for survival. And he will continue this struggle until the last Russian soldier is sent to the front with his last penny. In summary, the course of the war is shaped not only by the front lines, but also by the resilience of the economy, society, and leadership. Ukraine is growing stronger by resisting. Russia, on the other hand, is collapsing while appearing strong. And at the end of this conflict, it will not only be cities that are rebuilt, but also regimes. Thank you for watching. Now let's return to the Caucasus. If Kadyrov's shadow reign of terror ends, torches will be lit from Dagestan to Ingushetia. People will write slogans saying, "The first night Putin was challenged." If the Kremlin cannot prevent this by moving the paramilitary Yunus battalion from Grozny to Moscow, it will have to recall the battalion it sent to Ukraine. This will ease the pressure on the front lines, and Kiev's tanks will push back the invasion lines. The words of Russian military strategists, "The Chechen whip is worth twice as much as the Ukrainian trenches," are not empty. Kadyrov is aware of this. While emptying the Meshet safe in Grozny, his advisors say, "Don't leave any traces. If Dubai isn't enough, there's always Yerevan." But under pressure from Yerevan, a legal tunnel has been opened between Brussels. The West sent Armenia a message saying, "If you return the fugitives, we will open the door to investment." The Russian Pitbull's men frown at this, saying, "We'll be caught in a double bind." Stop for a moment and look at the contradiction. The world remembers Putin's insistence on breaking the Istanbul grain agreement. Now Putin cannot say that he is standing by his Pitbull as he flees. Because in the Moscow crowd, the question, "If even Kadyrov is leaving, why should I stay?" will become a hot topic. The economy of loyalty is an engine that runs on bribery. When the money tap is turned off, the pistons seize up. The most ironic scene in this turmoil can be seen in Dubai Marina. On the promenade, in an expensive open-air hookah lounge, the bankers who financed yesterday's war are now trembling. What will happen if Russia signs the extradition agreement? At the same table, a Chechen businessman is worried that if Kadyrov comes, we won't be left in the shadows. There is also a rebellious side to this business. Oleg Deripaska, the famous billionaire industrialist and founder of the Rusal Aluminum Company, is one example. Despite being seen as an ally of Putin, Deripaska has openly called for peace, saying, Peace is very important. Negotiations must begin as soon as possible. Of course, this sentiment is not isolated. Others in Putin's camp are beginning to voice their concerns more openly. Moreover, the fuse for uprisings against Russian leadership was lit in 2023. The spark that ignited the rebellion against Putin came from his own personal chef. As you may recall, Yevgeny Prigozhin, a former close associate and leader of the Wagner Group, made headlines when he released a video condemning the war and calling for an end to it. This act of defiance referred to the Wagner Group's short-lived rebellion in June 2023, which significantly damaged Putin's public image. The Wagner Rebellion was a striking example of growing unrest. In June 2023, Prigozhin launched a rebellion against Putin over disagreements about the conduct of the war in Ukraine. Citing heavy losses among his forces and believing that the conflict had done enough damage, Prigozhin staged a 24-hour rebellion. His forces seized the city of Rostov-on-Don, capturing the military headquarters there, and then marched toward Moscow, gaining some support from Russian citizens along the way. Although he ultimately agreed to resign in exchange for a pardon, the incident exposed significant weaknesses in Putin's control. Viktor Alksnis, a retired Soviet Air Force colonel and prominent conservative, commented on the implications of Prigozhin's actions. Prigozhin showed that it was possible to seize a city of 1 million people with impunity, make demands of the country's leadership, refuse to obey orders, and organize military marches on Moscow while killing Russian soldiers along the way. The audacity of the rebellion signaled to others that Putin's authority could be challenged. Prigozhin's death in a suspicious plane crash in August 2023 only fueled further speculation and unrest. His courage, as some say, emboldened other oligarchs and mercenary leaders to speak out against the war. Another militia leader, referring to the countless social problems created by his leadership, openly called on the Russian army to overthrow Putin. Even whispers of a coup in Russia are unprecedented and signal a significant shift in the country's political atmosphere. In other words, the potential for a coup is becoming more concrete with each passing day. Andrei Melnichenko, one of Russia's richest individuals, has launched legal proceedings against the government's attempts to nationalize his company. His case signals the beginning of what could turn into a broader resistance among the oligarchs. If these powerful individuals come together, their combined economic clout could pose a significant threat to Putin's hold on power. While they do not expect a collapse that would force Putin to end the invasion of Ukraine, half a dozen businessmen interviewed said that Russia's economy has changed significantly since the war began, making its long-term goals unattainable. The views of Russia's wealthiest businessmen, whose companies employ hundreds of thousands of people and play a central role in the country's economy, contrast with the government's optimistic outlook and spending targets, while the recent market upturn of some European companies with significant interests in the region also contradicts these views. Each company has its own economic analysis, which suggests that these views reflect a broader sentiment in the private sector. The sanctions forcing Russia to redirect its trade from Europe to Asia have forced many billionaires to bring money back from abroad. As companies restructured their export, payment, and logistics systems, Russia imposed new taxes on them to finance Putin's war machine. The Russian government's September macroeconomic forecasts, which assumed that Putin could remain in office for another 6 years until 2030, predict at least 3% annual growth in the last 3 years of that period. Many billionaires, criticizing government policy and asking that their names not be disclosed, said the plan was overly optimistic. They said that even if a ceasefire is finally achieved in Ukraine, sanctions are unlikely to be eased anytime soon. According to some businessmen, the Russian economy is facing difficult structural changes. The departure of international companies has reduced production capacity, particularly in the technology and machinery sectors. Demand from the defense industry is increasingly shaping the war economy. Import substitution is progressing slowly, and the Army's need for more new units is intensifying labor shortages. Capacity constraints, particularly around labor and equipment, have also begun to negatively affect economic growth. All these factors are accelerating the reversal of Russian oligarchs against Vladimir Putin. So, what could happen next? Will the Kremlin buy back loyalty with armored convoys, or will it declare the Pitbull's escape as treason and unleash a wave of fear in Chechen streets? Will the Russian people interpret the Pitbull's escape as, finally, the rotten tooth has been pulled, or as we need to jump ship too? What do you think? Leave your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Major General Mikhail Gudkov, who signed Russia's invincible Black Sea Doctrine, is no longer alive. 4 precision strikes on his secret headquarters on the Kursk border vaporized Putin's decorated commander and his staff. The elimination of Gudkov, who had been newly assigned to the Russian Navy's land-based forces and was regarded as the symbol of war crimes committed by the 155th Marine Infantry Brigade, has triggered panic in the Kremlin, leaving only one question on everyone's mind. Who is next on the list of Russian commanders boasting bulletproof armor? For details, behind-the-scenes intelligence, and the codes of Ukraine's strike, shake, and scare strategy, stay with us in the video, subscribe, and share your comments. Ukraine's delicate attacks in strategic depth have resulted in another loss for the Russian military command. This time, the target was not only tactical, but also a name of great symbolic importance. Lieutenant General Mikhail Gudkov, former commander of the 155th Marine Brigade, long known for his war crimes, and recently promoted to deputy commander of the Russian Navy's land and coastal forces, was eliminated in an area near the Ukrainian border in the Kursk region. According to a statement by the Russian Ministry of Defense, General Gudkov was killed in a missile strike near the village of Koronevo in Kursk. While the incident was described as a loss incurred during combat operations, no further details were provided. But according to information shared on social media by a Russian Naval Veterans Association, the brigade's command center was hit by 4 precision-guided missiles. At least 9 senior officers, including Gudkov and the brigade's staff, were killed in the attack. Gudkov's close friend Nariman Shikaliev was also killed in the attack. The 155th Brigade had gained notoriety, particularly since the beginning of the war, for the killing of civilians in the suburbs of Kiev and the execution of Ukrainian prisoners of war. Gudkov, who had long served as the brigade's commander, was one of the symbols of this dark past. In Ukrainian public opinion, his name was associated with serious human rights violations against civilians, particularly in operations around Bucha and Irpin. Gudkov's death is seen as both revenge for this past and a blow to Russia's military decision-making structure. Although the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has not taken direct responsibility, there are indications that the attack was carried out with long-range, target-specific missile systems. This suggests that the attack required a high level of planning and intelligence. Another striking aspect of the attack is that General Gudkov had recently been promoted by Vladimir Putin himself. At the end of March, Gudkov was present during Putin's visit to a nuclear submarine, where he was praised by the Russian leader and described as a commander who should be emulated by other units. Following this promotion, the general was appointed Deputy Commander of the Navy, an important position coordinating the Army and Navy. In October 2023, Gudkov was awarded the Gold Star Medal of the Hero of the Russian Federation. In his speech at the ceremony, Putin praised him, saying, "General Gudkov represents the honor of our armed forces with the courage and command skills he demonstrated at the head of the 155th Brigade." But this praise did not make a commander who was on Ukraine's radar invisible. Even the Primorsky region in Russia's Far East, where General Gudkov had previously served, was involved in the response to the attack. Regional Governor Oleg Kozhemyanko confirmed Gudkov's death in a statement on social media, describing him as a determined commander who died on the front lines alongside his soldiers. General Mikhail Gudkov was the highest-ranking Russian officer to be killed in the conflict since Deputy Chief of the General Staff Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik was killed in another assassination operation carried out by Kiev in April. This shows that Ukraine is pursuing an effective and targeted strategy, not only on the front lines, but also at the command level of the war. But a storm is brewing in Russian public opinion. One question is spreading by word of mouth. What was he doing there? When news of Lieutenant General Mikhail Gudkov's death spread, the initial reaction was not grief, but bewilderment. Pro-war Russian military blogs and Telegram channels began to react before the details of the incident were clear. Why was a commander of this rank still in an area so close to the front line? Moreover, as an officer from the Navy who had been promoted by the General Staff, why was he directly commanding ground forces? No official answers to these questions have yet been given. But the answers quietly circulating are more shocking. There are traitors among us. The sensitivity of the attack in which Gudkov was killed cannot be ignored. According to Russian military bloggers, the missile strike on the brigade headquarters in the Kursk region was carried out with pinpoint accuracy, reinforcing allegations of inside information. The location of the command center was known only to high-ranking officers and a select few personnel. So how did Ukraine obtain these coordinates? This means a new breach in Russia's information security chain. Even some pro-Kremlin figures are now openly suggesting that there is a mole inside. A pro-war channel wrote, "The Ukrainian front is not attacking, it is dismantling, step by step from the inside out." And this incident is not an exception. Gudkov's death is only the latest in a series of targeted operations carried out by Ukraine against Russian military leadership. Back in April, Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik was killed by a bomb planted in his car in the heart of Moscow. Ukrainian intelligence claimed responsibility for the attack. Then, in May, 4 officers belonging to the Chechen Akhmet units were targeted and killed in 2 consecutive explosions near Skadovsk. In the days that followed, Yevgeny Rydakov, one of the developers of Russia's electronic warfare systems, was blown up in his car. This chain of assassinations goes beyond classic sabotage and is a strategy that directly targets the morale of the military leadership. Each one creates fear and insecurity among Russia's decision makers. Each one sends the message that no place is safe. Now all eyes are on Kursk. Russian bloggers and retired military officers are asking loudly, how did such a sensitive location become a target? Which system failed? Whose hand has fallen into Ukraine's hands? There are no answers. But the tone of the questions is becoming harsher. The Kremlin's press statements are silent, and the defense ministry is avoiding giving details. But the whispers are fueling insecurity at the highest levels of command. As we can see, the latest attack is not limited to the elimination of a commander. It also represents a direct and calculated retaliation against one of the most controversial units of the Russian army throughout the war. For Ukraine, this is one of the symbolic punishments in a war where what is happening on the ground is not being met with justice. With Gudkov's death, the 155th Marine Infantry Brigade is no longer just burdened by its past dark activities. The brigade is now on the brink of a new crisis in terms of leadership vacuum, moral collapse, and command chain. In fact, this crisis had begun to show signs months before the assassination in July. In June, the building used as the command headquarters of the Marine Corps was razed to the ground in a highly planned and effective HIMARS operation carried out by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Guided munitions fired from the US-made M142 HIMARS. Rocket system hit their target without deviation and struck the center of the headquarters building. Following the explosion, the interior of the building collapsed. Concrete walls were shattered, steel beams collapsed, and the headquarters was engulfed in flames. Immediately after the attack, clouds of black smoke rose from the scene and covered the skies of Rilsk throughout the day. The magnitude of the fire and the intensity of the explosion gave strong indications that a large number of Russian personnel had been neutralized in the area. But the most striking detail was that a high-ranking Russian officer serving inside was also eliminated in the attack. In May, explosions near the main deployment area of the 155th Guards Marine Brigade in Vladivostok were recorded as one of the major turning points in terms of the security and stability of the unit. At that time, the explosions occurred in the strategic Desantnaya Bay area north of Vladivostok, which is part of Primorsky Krai. This was a sensitive location where various units affiliated with the 155th Brigade were stationed, military equipment was stored, and personnel temporarily resided. The attack targeted the 47th Separate Air Assault Battalion, which was directly affiliated with this brigade. Sources close to Ukrainian Special Services stated that the action was carried out as part of a sabotage operation. The sources reported that the sabotage was organized by elements linked to Ukrainian intelligence, and that detailed field reconnaissance was conducted during the planning phase of the operation. After the explosion, the area was virtually locked down. Russian authorities closed the main roads around Desantnaya Bay to traffic following the incident. Eyewitnesses reported that military ambulances and vehicles covered with tarpaulins were quickly evacuated from the area, some of which appeared to be heavily damaged personnel carriers or armored vehicles. At the same time, there was significant congestion in civilian traffic. Local residents reported that all roads leading to the scene were blocked by military checkpoints. An interesting development occurred immediately after the incident. A K-27PS military helicopter belonging to the Russian army began patrol flights over the area. As its name suggests, this model was primarily designed for search and rescue operations. But this time, its purpose was clearly different. It is believed that the helicopter was deployed to track down those responsible for the sabotage, or to identify their escape routes. Despite the nature of the incident and its impact being clear, Russian local authorities and media outlets offered a different explanation for the explosions. Official statements claimed that the explosions were caused by the detonation of methane gas cylinders. This explanation contradicted findings suggesting that the incident was a direct act of sabotage. Military sources, however, suggested that such cover-up attempts were an effort to protect military morale and public confidence, which had already been damaged in the region. The truth is that the incident in Desantnaya Bay was not merely a physical attack, it was also a loss of prestige at the heart of the Russian defense system. Moreover, the targeting of a symbolic garrison like Vladivostok, thousands of kilometers away from the front lines, also exposed the operational capabilities of Ukrainian intelligence, which had penetrated deep into enemy territory. As mentioned earlier, the 155th Marine Infantry Brigade had been involved in numerous war crimes, including the execution of Ukrainian prisoners of war. For example, in October 2024, units belonging to the 155th Marine Brigade, which launched an attack on a critical salient in the Kursk Oblast, showed the darkest side of war. Russian Marines who launched an assault on Ukraine's 300 square mile frontline region captured 9 Ukrainian drone operators, seized their weapons, and executed them without trial. The events of the following day signaled that this brutality would not go unpunished. Ukraine's elite air assault units launched a revenge mission. The target was clear, the 155th Marine Brigade. Ukrainian troops hunted down Russian forces one by one, leaving none alive. The 95th Air Assault Brigade surrounded Russian units near the village of Leonidovo. In the ensuing clash, 3 BTR armored vehicles were destroyed, and at least 30 Russian soldiers were eliminated. This was not the first disaster for the 155th Marine Infantry Brigade. This unit, which once numbered approximately 3,000 soldiers at full strength, had also suffered heavy losses during an attack on the town of Vuhledar in 2023. This once feared unit, once praised by the Kremlin, has been repeatedly routed by Ukrainian forces. The officer who was dismissed in June was one of the top figures in the brigade, which had committed brutal crimes against Ukrainians. However, the Ukrainians used HIMARS to cut this officer's ticket. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to exert multifaceted pressure on Russian forces, not only through precise strikes on strategic targets, but also through targeted operations directly in frontline contact zones. The latest operation against the 155th Guards Marine Infantry Brigade clearly demonstrated how Kiev is advancing both in terms of tactical success and psychological superiority. At the end of June, the elite air assault forces of the Ukrainian armed forces successfully completed a high-risk and meticulously planned operation in the Sumy region in the northeast of the country. The operation was carried out in a forested and rugged area. Ukrainian paratroopers launched their infiltration operation at night, covering several kilometers in complete secrecy. Thanks to thermal imaging cameras, navigation sensors, and silent movement techniques, enemy presence was detected, and an encirclement maneuver was initiated. After a short but effective clash, a total of 15 Russian soldiers were captured alive, including some who were forced to surrender their weapons. According to a statement by the Ukrainian army, most of these soldiers belonged to the 155th Guards Marine Brigade and the 810th Marine Brigade, which had previously been accused of war crimes in the vicinity of Kiev. This detail was of critical importance in terms of the message Kiev was sending to the public. Active personnel from the accused units are now in Ukraine's hands. The operation resonated not only on a military level, but also on an ethical and diplomatic one. The Ukrainian General Staff stated that all prisoners were immediately provided with medical care and psychological support following the operation. The prisoners, who were treated in accordance with international law, were later interrogated by the relevant authorities. The statements made during these interrogations once again highlighted the deep corruption within the Russian army. Many soldiers stated that they had been subjected to systematic humiliation, beatings, threats, and severe psychological pressure after joining the brigade. Some statements emphasized that new recruits were sent to the front lines by their commanders, as if they were being sent to their deaths and were viewed as expendable. One of them even stated that he was beaten in front of his entire unit for questioning orders and later attempted suicide. These confessions showed that morale, discipline, and fear had seriously broken down not only on the battlefield, but also within the Russian military structure. These soldiers captured by Ukraine are expected to be used in a possible prisoner exchange agreement. But Kiev's main strategic gain here is the positive perception it has created in the international public opinion. Ukraine uses such operations not only to weaken its enemy, but also to emphasize the humanitarian dimension of the war and strengthen its own position. Western observers and experts in the law of war compare Ukraine's transparent and lawful treatment of prisoners of war with Russia's systematic violations. This has become one of the factors ensuring continued military and political support for Ukraine, especially among the European public. There has been a noticeable increase in similar raids carried out by Ukraine in recent months. The increase in the number of prisoners taken alive indicates both a decline in the will to fight among Russian troops and the growing technical and operational superiority of Ukrainian special forces. In short, a new type of war is beginning, but it is not the war Russia was waiting for. It is no longer trench lines and tank battles. There is sabotage, missiles, assassinations, and chaos behind enemy lines. And Ukraine is playing this new game better than anyone expected. Gudkov's death was not just a blow to the Russian Navy. It was a psychological blow, proof that no rank, medal, or title can protect you from what is to come. A portrait of Gudkov now stands in his hometown, covered in flowers. But it is not grief that truly disturbs the corridors of power in Moscow. It is fear. Because if even a Russian hero can be hunted down and killed in his own country, then no one, absolutely no one, is untouchable. Thank you for watching.
These are indeed extraordinary images of panic around a Russian arms plant. You could hear, in fact, the gunfire of what is likely to be security personnel shooting up what they think are drones.
two daggers were plunged into Russia's secure industrial hinterland overnight. As the Kupol factory in Izhevsk burned fiercely, red clouds billowed into the sky from the Saratov-Sinti's refinery, striking a blow to Moscow's budget. Behind this double blow lay Kiev's long-range Bober 2 kamikaze drone swarm and its deep strike-and-run doctrine. However, the Kremlin, as usual, resorted to the usual euphemisms in the first hours. The real picture is much sharper because the silence of Kupol blinded the Tor batteries, and the collapse of Saratov dried up diesel exports. Now we are laying bare the plan behind the attack, the game-changing drones used, and the devastating effects on Russia's defense energy balance. Don't miss the rest. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like the video to show your support. First, let's delve into the critical details of Ukraine's attack on Izhevsk, carried out from a distance of 1,300 kilometers. The Kupol facility here is a key institution in Russia's defense industry. It produces air defense missile systems, target training systems, and provides maintenance services. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the facility has also been producing Harpy A1 loitering munitions using Chinese components. The facility is subject to sanctions imposed by the EU, the US, Canada, Ukraine, and Switzerland. As a result, it has been under Ukraine's crosshairs for quite some time. The plan for the Kupol strike was drafted last winter in a small hangar on the Black Sea coast. Ukrainian engineers gathered field experience from Bayraktar platforms and transferred it to the Bober 2 airframe, coated the composite hull with carbon nanofibers, and added thin canard surfaces to the wing roots, reducing the radar signature to less than 3 square meters. The guidance navigation control package, equipped with LiDAR sensors, achieved such precision that it could map the nighttime fog layer over the Ural region with millimeter accuracy. This allowed it to slip through the blind cone of Tor M2K batteries and make a pinpoint strike on the factory roof. 24 drones were used in the attack wave, 6 of which targeted the Kupol line, and Tor radars shot down 3 of them. However, the remaining 3 set fire to the soldering workshop, power transformer room, and optical calibration section, delaying production by 10 weeks. Considering that Kupol produces 300 Tor targeting sets annually, this delay will push back the delivery of each new battery to the front lines by at least 6 weeks, effectively eliminating 8% of the shields needed to stop Russian cruise missiles. In an official statement, the Russian Deputy Defense Minister was forced to say, "A local area was damaged. Production will return to normal within a few days." However, satellite images leaked to social media showed a football field-sized unroofed burn ring that engulfed a 6,000 square meter workshop. In response, local officials acknowledged that a 1,300 square meter section of the factory roof had collapsed. 3 workers had lost their lives, and over 35 others were seriously injured. The first toll of the fire at Kupol was felt in artillery fire statistics. According to Ukrainian General Staff data, in the spring of 2024, the Russian army was firing an average of 12,000 artillery shells per day. Following the Kupol attack, this number dropped to 9,000. The primary reason for the decline was the air corridors that emerged along the front line due to the withdrawal of Tor batteries to the Moscow and Crimea regions, coupled with additional strikes on ammunition depots by Ukrainian kamikaze drone swarms infiltrating through these corridors. The second butterfly effect disrupting Russian artillery's gunpowder supply was a logistics fuel shortage. This is because the Saratov refinery, which was hit on the same night, single-handedly met 5% of Western Russia's diesel needs and 30% of frontline tanker fuel. At the same time, this facility processes 6.5 million tons of crude oil per year, with 40% of its product range being diesel, 20% gasoline, and the remainder jet fuel and chemicals. Ukrainian military intelligence emphasized that the facility's diesel and jet fuel export lines directly supplied the Russian southern military district. In other words, the facility is the lifeline of Russia's western region. The drone trio targeted the hydrocracking reactor operating at 450 degrees Celsius. The warhead with a shaped charge blew off the reactor dome and detonated the steam pumps connected to the distillation tower. As temperatures surged to 1,100 degrees Celsius within 25 minutes, the steel melted and the fire suppression pipes vaporized, making it impossible to extinguish the blaze. A 40-meter-high flame column rose from the storage tank area, with the fire reported to have raged until dawn. As a result, oil flow ceased immediately. The Russian Energy Ministry said in its first press release that production will partially resume within 10 days. However, independent consulting reports indicated that the best-case scenario for recasting and reinstalling the Western-licensed single-piece dome would take 2 months. This 2-month delay means that 17,000 tons of finished product will be lost from the market each day. At an average price of $700 per barrel, this amounts to approximately $800 million evaporating from the Russian treasury. While diverting crude oil from the Ural pipeline to North European refineries to compensate for the reduced product volume is an option, Western terminals already operating at over 90% capacity cannot handle the additional load. Loading and unloading delays are increasing transportation costs by 18%. To avoid passing this loss on to consumers, the Kremlin has increased the tax subsidy of 50 rubles per liter, but this move is widening the budget deficit. The Ministry of Finance was forced to revise its deficit forecast from 3.5% of GDP in March to 4% in its April report. When the full impact of the Saratov attack is felt, the deficit is expected to approach 4.5%. Pressure on the ruble pushed interest rates back up. Inflation hit double digits, and social media posts about shrinking shopping baskets weakened the Kremlin's narrative of economic resilience. An even tougher wave hit the psychological front. Videos of workers crying as they recorded the Coup fire reached 15 million views in 12 hours. Censorship filters have broken down, and even state television has been forced to air programs titled Rear Front Risk Analysis. The Bober 2 program, which forms the technical backbone of the attack, is only the first phase of Kiev's long-range doctrine. In the second phase, codenamed 07 Passage, a 120-kilometer range mini turbojet is being integrated into the Bober 2 body. The warhead is being increased from 75 kilograms to 100 kilograms, and a remote image transmission package is being added to allow the operator to update the target at the last second. Kiev planners are also using wet curved routes to push Russian radars to the point of insensitivity. The Bober 2's low-heat engine, which burns an ethanol gasoline mixture, reduces its infrared signature by half, appearing as small stray clouds in S-400 radar L-band scans. Russian electronic warfare units frequently send jamming signals to drones. However, the lighter ion's preferred path-following package locks onto the target within meters, even without GNSS data. In other words, the jam-proof flight regime renders Moscow's standard jamming protocols ineffective. The repair cycle on the Kremlin's defense front is also in a deadlock. The Kupol electronic sighting set contains Chinese-made rotating optical sensors. However, the final vacuum chamber for assembly is located in the Izhevsk production line and nowhere else. When a fire melted the inner steel lining of this chamber, the calibration lasers were also destroyed. While the backup line in Yekaterinburg calibrates 10 units per day, the Kupol production line remains idle. The export side is facing an even bigger schedule shock. The delivery deadline for two $200 million Tor M2K packages signed with Algeria and India has been pushed back to February 2026. Moscow has offered the Pantsir S1L as a compromise to avoid paying a penalty, but this also requires partial deliveries. This uncertainty is also affecting the flow of ammunition to the front lines. The Russian army had planned to replenish ammunition and fuel stocks in its logistics depots on a 7-day cycle. The diesel shortage in Saratov has reduced train shipments to a 2-day rhythm, which is clogging railway lines and causing artillery shell stocks to run out of time. Ukraine's real goal is to simultaneously wear down Russia's defense industry, energy revenue stream, and domestic public morale in line with its economic strangulation scenario dubbed Deserted Planet. A strategist close to the general staff told American media that if the $40,000 we spend on a drone wave results in $1 million repair bill for them, we're on the right track. The Russian Defense Ministry, meanwhile, threatened a new energy bombardment in the winter months, stating that it would respond in kind to terrorist attacks. It is estimated that there are only 370 Kh-111 and Kh-22 cruise missiles left in stock. Patriot PAC-3, Iris-T SLM, Sampuy-T, and NASAMS lines are serving as shields, but ammunition production is only 250 rounds per month. If Russia launches a simultaneous salvo of 120 missiles, the batteries could reach saturation, causing Kiev's energy grid to drop below 50%. However, this move costs Moscow $500 million each time. A single strike on a refinery like Saratov would result in the same cost being incurred by Kiev. Due to this asymmetry, as Russia escalates, it is drawn into a cost trap, while Kiev is tightening the noose with its cheap kamikaze packages, now in mass production. This dynamic slowdown is felt in the daily lives of the Russian people. When diesel prices rose by 10 rubles in a short time at fuel stations, social media was flooded with comments like, "The state that cannot protect our refineries is punishing us with price hikes." A worker who recorded the fire in Izhevsk shared a video on social media, saying, "The heart of my factory has been shattered," as he shed tears amid a cloud of smoke behind him. The video reached 15 million views within just 12 hours. A mothers' union launched a campaign demanding war compensation for factory workers. This psychological breakdown requires the Kremlin to allocate additional budget to its propaganda machine. However, the Ministry of Finance, which is already struggling to find foreign currency for the Kupol repair and the Saratov reactor, is trying to patch up the hole that has been opened. Russian history carries within it a reflex to endure long wars, but in the digital age, the information filter is porous, inflation is visible, and lost videos go viral. Internal pressure is producing a new socio-political threshold. A May survey by a Russian polling organization increased the percentage of those who believe that the situation will worsen in the next 6 months from 27% to 37%. The highest increase was among men under 30. This group also faces the risk of being called to the front lines, so mental fatigue is eroding the walls of propaganda. The Russian military blogosphere erupted after the Kupol attack, with comments such as, "Enemy drones are coming right up to the windows, and we're still waiting for modern radar." This anger has also spilled over into Telegram channels of contract soldiers sent to the front lines, with comments such as, "The rear is burning and the front is getting the scraps." The Kremlin has allocated $1 billion for new information control packages. However, it sold $9 billion in foreign currency to support the ruble, reducing foreign exchange reserves from $415 billion to $392 billion. The economic buffer is no longer at its previous level. Even though Russian state television continues to broadcast documentaries on economic resilience, even a simple comparison of the ruble and the Turkish lira makes ordinary viewers feel that their money is losing value. In the digital age, it is impossible to hide the numbers. For Russia, this negative picture is only the beginning. The Rostov-Don compressor stations, Omsk petrochemical depots, and Nizhny Novgorod voltage transformers have already been targeted. When the turbojet version of the Bober 2 reaches a range of 1,600 kilometers, even heavy industry clusters beyond the Urals will be at risk. Russia has not yet expanded its Siberian defense layer. According to a NATO intelligence report, by the end of 2025, monthly hit-and-run waves of 25 drones will double with the serial production of 40 drones. It is difficult to control the military use of Chinese-made civilian electronics because the circuit labels say New Generation Field Tractor Sensor. These gray supply lines are on Washington's response list, but actual restrictions do not seem possible in the short term. Russia's classic deterrent is nuclear weapons. The Russian Deputy Defense Minister reiterated this line in a June briefing, saying that deep strikes are assessed within the framework of the nuclear triad deterrent. However, applying strategic deterrence to a tactical problem increases the risk of diplomatic isolation for Moscow. Even China is making statements to curb escalation across the border. That is why the Kremlin is currently using the nuclear card as a propaganda smokescreen. Still, fear-mongering may help contain internal pressure in Russia, but every new drone incident tests social patience. Alarm bells are also ringing on the diplomatic front. The United Kingdom last month updated its total embargo on the sale of critical refinery equipment. The United States recently expanded sanctions targeting the energy sector to include secondary coverage in a new law. This is forcing Indian banks to act cautiously in Russian supply chains. Indian refineries were using intermediary banks to split dollar transactions in the discounted Ural oil purchase process, but Washington's pressure is slowing this flow. This slowdown is indirectly supporting Kiev's economic strangulation efforts. When all these layers come together, the picture is striking. Ukraine is not only sending drone explosives, but also time pressure. Each explosion triggers a new repair cycle, each cycle creates a new budget deficit, and each deficit puts additional strain on the ruble. Russia, meanwhile, is forced to allocate multiple resources to protect both its defense lines and its refinery chain simultaneously. But repair costs are skyrocketing due to a lack of core technology. Thus, the war is not only being fought on the front lines, but also in the invisible arteries connecting factories, warehouses, banks, and refineries. Will Kyiv achieve the desired outcome with this strategy? At a time when even a few meters of ground are hard to gain on the front lines, striking at the economic nerve centers in the background may be the most profitable tactic. However, there is also the possibility that Russian air forces will increase their retaliation rate by relying on energy infrastructure once winter arrives. At this point, Western Patriot missile stocks, Ukraine's domestic drone capacity, and Russia's petrochemical reserves will be critical determinants. On one side, frozen batteries. On the other, frozen paychecks. The moment of decision is approaching. In summary, Ukraine's long-range attacks now target not only plans for frontline advances, but also the fundamental arteries that keep Russia's war machine afloat. These attacks are creating a chain of costly-to-reverse destruction, particularly in defense and energy corridors. Each successful strike does not merely destroy a facility, it also strains the networks, interconnected infrastructure, and economic cycles that the facility supports. For example, the temporary disabling of Coup radar systems does not merely weaken air defense for a few hours. It also disrupts the firing algorithms, early warning rhythms, and targeting continuity of the Tor batteries protected by that radar network. The systems are interconnected, and when one fails, the others become more vulnerable. Similarly, the strikes on the refineries in Saratov are not just about physical damage to production facilities. They also mean a decline in oil revenues, expectations of fuel shortages in the domestic market, and a weakening of local governments' ability to secure resources. Every explosion directly erodes the Kremlin's war fund. Moscow, of course, keeps saying it's ready to retaliate. But this rhetoric is becoming less and less convincing. Because after every retaliation, the defense budget deficit grows a bit more, raw materials for weapons production become harder to find, and personnel recruitment becomes even more of a problem. The weight of the economic cost is now being felt not only at the strategic level, but also on the tables of ordinary Russian citizens. The shrapnel effect caused by the tactical drones used by Ukraine is creating a deep structural erosion that would not be expected in a conventional war. Do you think Kiev will use this deep hit-and-run strategy to bring Moscow to the negotiating table? Or will countermeasures restore the balance? We look forward to your comments. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like us. Stay tuned.
Volodymyr Zelensky met with US President Donald Trump. A massive drone attack by the armed forces of Ukraine on Russia. Oil depots, factories, and airfields are burning, and near Tokmak, the Ukrainian armed forces split the Russian train in half.
The transformation of railways, bridges, and signal boxes into targets demonstrates that modern warfare is won not by the barrel of a tank, but by control of supply lines. Russian trains loaded with fuel are turning into fireballs. An attack that destroyed more than 40 wagons of ammunition in just a few minutes. This was the visible face of Ukraine's latest logistical punch, delivered on June 25th on the Zaporizhia line. But behind the scenes, a multi-layered doctrine of attrition is at work, ranging from partisan sabotage cells to drone swarms, special forces raids to electronic blinding. Now we go far beyond the conflict line to secret attacks that are crippling Russia's railway backbone. In mid-May, Ukraine moved to cut off the Russian army's links between Crimea and Donbass. The final blow was dealt to the Russian army's logistical backbone near the town of Tokmak in the Zaporizhia region. This sensitive attack, which took place at around 11:15 a.m. on June 25th, targeted Russia's military supply lines behind the front lines. At the center of the attack was a massive freight train consisting of approximately 40 wagons. The train was loaded with fuel tankers, containers, and various munitions. The operation was carried out as part of a joint operation coordinated by the Ukrainian Southern Defense Forces. The first attack, carried out based on precise coordinates provided by reconnaissance units, immediately halted the train's movement. Subsequent precision strikes split the wagons in two, scattering them across the tracks. The force of the explosion caused some tanker wagons to derail and overturn, while some containers caught fire. Petro Andriushchenko, head of the Center for the Study of Occupation, said in his assessment of the attack, "Right now, it's like a game of bowling. It's turned into a competition to see who can knock over more cars." According to Andriushchenko, the attack is not only physical destruction, it is also a direct intervention in the Russian army's supply process on the Zaporizhia line. This train was being used to transport fuel and possibly ammunition to the occupied territories. With rising temperatures during the summer months, a constant supply of fuel is critical for armored vehicles and logistics trucks. Therefore, the attack on this train did not merely halt a shipment. It also directly impaired the operational capacity of Russian forces in the region. Russian rescue teams dispatched to the area after the attack reportedly struggled to approach the burning carriages. Satellite imagery and video footage from local sources vividly illustrate the intensity of the attack. Many of the wagons were completely destroyed at the point of impact. Some images show high-density columns of smoke rising into the sky. From the perspective of the Ukrainian army, this operation stands out as both a moral and tactical success. According to experts, such logistical strike operations restrict Russia's rear area mobility, extend supply times, and force field commanders to constantly reorganize their resupply plans. The success of a railway attack on this scale in the southern front also highlights the high coordination of intelligence and fire support elements. Ukraine's systematic targeting of the enemy's transportation network clearly shows that the war is no longer confined to the front lines, but is being waged at every link in the supply chain. As Andriushchenko noted, detailed visual records of the attack are expected to be shared in the coming hours. But it is already clear that this attack will weaken the Russian presence on the Tokmak line and provide new opportunities for maneuver for Ukrainian forces. The railway attack near Tokmak is just one link in Ukraine's strategic campaign against Russian logistics networks. This operation is not an isolated act. Rather, it is a reflection on the ground of a weeks-long and increasingly sophisticated attrition strategy. In addition to direct artillery and UAV strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces, partisan networks operating within the country and in the occupied territories have become an integral part of this effort. One of the most recent examples of this is the sabotage carried out by the Atish movement in the Donetsk region on June 28th. According to a statement shared by the movement on its Telegram channel, one of the organization's agents targeted a vital railway infrastructure facility near the settlement of Yasinovataya. The sabotage targeted the relay cabinet of a railway line critical for military transportation heading to Donetsk. This cabinet was part of the electronic brain that enabled the signaling systems to function and regulated the safe passage of trains. After days of surveillance and opportunity analysis, the agent determined the most opportune moment for the attack. The operation was carried out during a change of guard by enemy units, taking advantage of security vulnerabilities in the area. The relay cabinet was burned down and the signaling system was disabled. According to eyewitnesses, immediately after the incident, there was abnormal congestion and disruption on the railway line. Some of the trains used for military transport had to be turned back, while others were kept waiting outside the station for hours. In a statement, the Atash movement said, "Not only passengers were being transported along this line, but also ammunition, fuel, and supplies. We chose the most opportune moment for the attack. Due to the relay system being hit, trains carrying fuel to the enemy were seriously delayed. This directly disrupted the pre-planned supply chain." The area around Yasinovataya in the Donetsk region is known as one of the most important logistics routes for Russian occupation forces on the Eastern Front. Industrial facilities and military ammunition depots in the region are regularly supplied via this railway line. It is also known that cargoes carrying tanks, armored personnel carriers, Grad multiple rocket launchers, and howitzers frequently arrive in the region. Therefore, even the smallest disruption on this route can cause chain delays in Russian planning at the front. According to sources close to the Ukrainian intelligence service, the recent operations of the Atash movement are not limited to railways. The organization is implementing a multi-pronged sabotage strategy, targeting supply convoys, logistics depots, fuel stocks, and information systems belonging to the military bureaucracy. Such actions complement Ukraine's traditional military power on the ground, especially in areas behind the front lines where it is difficult to target armed forces directly. These civilian resistance cells are undermining both the enemy's supply lines and morale. Additionally, these operations are forcing the Russian command structure to allocate more forces to internal security, thereby weakening its effectiveness on the front lines. Another railway attack took place on June 23rd. A massive Russian supply train moving between the villages of Levadne and Molokinsk on the most critical section of the Tokmak-Melitopol railway line was targeted by unmanned aerial vehicles. The cargo was not random. It was fuel, the most valuable raw material of the war. The most striking feature of the attacked train was that it consisted of 11 separate fuel tankers. These tankers were of vital importance for armored units, artillery batteries, and heavy mechanized elements operating around Tokmak. The smoke rising from the explosion was so dense that it could be seen from 15 to 20 kilometers away, according to local residents. The flames raged for hours, and Russian emergency response teams arrived at the scene late due to security concerns, unable to prevent the fire from spreading. This attack shows that Russia targeted not only a train, but also one of the most critical links in its supply chain extending to the rear of the front line. The professional nature of the attack at the tactical and operational levels also reveals the quality of the units behind it. According to information provided by Ukraine's military intelligence agency, GURMO, the operation was carried out by the Kabul 9 Special Unit. Kabul 9 is one of Ukraine's elite units, known for its deep strike and sabotage missions. During the operation, this unit worked in cooperation with the Ukrainian Southern Defense Forces, the Alpha Team, an elite unit in the country's counterterrorism field, and the Next Group affiliated with the State Special Communications Service. Thus, the operation became a highly integrated operation, combining both field sabotage and electronic coordination elements. The targeted train was traveling on the railway line between Tokmak and Melitopol, particularly in a strategic section between Levadne and Molokinsk. This area served as a vital logistics corridor for Russian military supply routes heading toward Tokmak. The severe damage caused in this section of the line was not limited to the destruction of the train. It also caused serious structural damage to the rail infrastructure. According to Ukrainian intelligence sources, repairs to this section of the railway line will take at least several weeks. During this period, regular fuel deliveries to the front line will not be possible. The supply of diesel and jet fuel, which is essential for the operation of armored units and air defense systems, will be severely disrupted. The impact of such an attack cannot be measured solely in terms of physical damage. Ukraine's main objective with this operation is to paralyze the Russian army's ability to move behind the front lines and increase operational pressure in the south, while this line is being repaired. The explosion at the Voskresensk train station in the Moscow region in December was also part of this strategy. Targeting a freight train at this critical point, only 70 miles from the Kremlin, was a message sent directly to the heart of Russia. The Ukrainian Military Intelligence Service, GUR, claimed responsibility for the attack by posting images of it on social media. But Russian state media claimed that the incident was a drill. The Kiev administration interpreted this denial as a sign of the Kremlin's growing fear of losing control and increasing resistance to the regime. In September, a freight train derailed in the Novy Oskol district of the Belgorod region, and the governor said the incident was caused by illegal interference. In July, a video posted on social media showed the smoky wreckage of a train that had derailed near the Lebedynsky mining and processing plant in Stary Oskol, another city in Belgorod. Also in July, a freight train derailed at a train station in the Moscow region, while the previous month, 5 fuel tanks derailed near the port of Ust-Luga in the Leningrad region, home to one of Russia's largest oil terminals. Attacks by Ukrainian partisans on Russian trains have played a critical role. Stop the Wagons and Anarcho-Communist War Organization are the two most significant Russian political groups expressing their opposition to the war by sabotaging railway infrastructure. Motivated by opposition to the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine and its domestic policies, Russian partisans have taken bold steps to weaken their country's military infrastructure by demonstrating some internal resistance to the war. As Russian public opinion increasingly turns against the Kremlin's war, this internal Russian resistance could gain strength and confidence. The campaign to sabotage Russian rail networks began shortly after Moscow's full-scale invasion, initially with sporadic attacks by Ukrainian special forces and sympathetic opposition members. But since then, it has evolved into a more systematic and coordinated effort directed by both Ukrainian intelligence agencies and, increasingly, local partisan groups both in occupied Ukraine and in Russia. One of the most successful sabotage attacks occurred in December 2023, when Ukrainian operatives inflicted significant damage on the Severomoysky railway tunnel deep in eastern Russia. One of the most recent notable attacks involved the sabotage of a railway bridge in Kinel, a vital artery for military logistics. Although the bridge remained standing, the damage caused significant disruptions to railway operations, halting the movement of military supplies and demonstrating the potential impact of such attacks. Similar sabotage efforts have targeted railway lines, transfer stations, and supply depots in Russia and occupied Ukrainian territories. These disruptions are creating logistical headaches for the Russian military, forcing them to reroute transportation via longer or less efficient routes, further straining their already stretched logistical capabilities. Even before the recent explosions, Russian transportation officials had been issuing loud warnings that Russia's railway network was on the brink of a catastrophic collapse. These sabotage campaigns have far-reaching implications beyond the immediate disruption they cause. Russia's military doctrine relies on a constant supply flow to sustain its forces at the front. Any disruption, particularly in a war context where Russian forces are already weakened, can have a cascading effect on operations. Replenishment delays caused by sabotage could reduce the availability of ammunition and critical supplies to frontline units, demoralize troops, and limit Russia's ability to conduct offensive operations. Ukrainian intelligence and special operations services have helped build the capabilities of Ukrainian and Russian partisan organizations and direct their activities toward various targets, and have also developed outreach to Russian groups that have long opposed the Putin regime, in addition to organizational efforts in eastern Ukraine prior to the full-scale Russian invasion. With each successful attack, the Kremlin is forced to invest additional resources in repairing and protecting railway infrastructure, which could otherwise be used on the battlefield. Such a strategy is reminiscent of the joint Jedburgh operations carried out by the British Special Operations Executive and the American Office of Strategic Services to activate French resistance activities against the invading German forces during World War II. Similarly, the Ukraine operation has weakened Russia's power projection capabilities, slowed the movement of reinforcements, and created bottlenecks in critical supply lines, much like the Jedburgh missions delayed the Germans' response to the Normandy landings in June 1944. To maximize the impact of this ongoing Ukrainian sabotage campaign, Kiev has several options to expand its sphere of influence and effectiveness. These actions also offer valuable lessons for Western special operators and local resistance partners. First, enhancing cooperation between Ukrainian intelligence services and local partisans in occupied Ukraine and across Russia is essential. The Ukrainian government can continue to provide support, training, and resources to partisan groups, thereby enhancing their ability to carry out increasingly complex sabotage operations. This could include providing the technical expertise, explosives, and other specialized equipment needed to target critical railway infrastructure. Additionally, increased information operations could leverage the growing Russian internal resistance to the Kremlin's occupation, further strengthen partisan efforts, and potentially create a decentralized resistance campaign across the country. Second, expanding the scope of the campaign to target additional logistics hubs and critical nodes within the railway network could amplify the cumulative impact. While targeting key bridges and railway lines, focusing on railway depots, maintenance stations, and transfer stations, even if they are less defensible, plays a crucial role in ensuring the smooth operation of the railway network and can cause longer-lasting disruptions if damaged. In summary, Ukraine's railway-focused sabotage and logistics destruction strategy provides a successful model for future conflicts. In modern warfare, targeting not only tanks and artillery, but also roads, trains, and plans has become the most critical component of victory. This strategy will continue to crush the Russian army not only on the battlefield, but also under the weight of the war it struggles to carry. Thank you for watching. Crimea is once again engulfed in flames, once the crossroads of civilizations, now Putin's weakest point. The skies over Crimea turned night into day on the night of June 28th. Ukrainian forces struck the Mi-8, Mi-26, and Mi-28 helicopter fleet, a Pantsir I air defense battery, and ammunition depots at the Kirovsky military airfield with pinpoint accuracy. Russian air defense was caught off guard. Since the first days of the war that began in February 2022, the Kirovsky airfield, seen as a safe rear base, was unable to repel Kiev's unmanned aerial vehicles this time. How much are the successive bridge and airbase attacks disrupting the peninsula's logistics? And to what extent is the Kremlin's "Crimea is ours" claim being shaken on the ground? We will examine the latest developments and details of the conflicts in the Ukraine war together. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like our videos to stay up to date with our content. The SBU claimed that Mi-8, Mi-26, and Mi-28 attack helicopters and a Pantsir I self-propelled anti-aircraft missile and weapon system were destroyed in the attack. The swarm, managed from the SBU Operations Center, consisted of long-range kamikaze drones capable of penetrating a blacked-out GPS zone using internal navigation and artificial intelligence. The advanced mini UAVs, codenamed ANTS by the engineers, tested the electronic warfare dome over the airport, while the main wave entered the parking area with a low-altitude flight profile, skimming the asphalt, consisting of Mi-8, Mi-26 heavy transport, and Mi-28 attack helicopters. At the same time, 2 drones carrying kinetic payloads struck the Panzer's 1 battery at the head of the runway. The SBU's initial report in the morning stated that at least 3 helicopters were burned out and rendered unusable, and that secondary explosions in fuel and ammunition depots continued until dawn. Secondary explosions were heard at the airport throughout the night. Within minutes, the Russian Defense Ministry issued a statement saying, "We shot down 41 unmanned aerial vehicles over Crimea." But according to Crimean Wind, a local Crimean media outlet, 5 to 6 explosions were heard in the Khabarovsky airport area on the night of June 28th. Prior to this, it was claimed that the sounds of unmanned aerial vehicles flying in the area were heard. Videos showed at least 1 Mi-28 fuselage burning in the apron area with melted rotors. NASA firm satellites recorded 5 separate red flame points on the northeast apron of the base. Independent records showed that the fire cone reached the size of 2 football fields. Local Crimean media also published videos of the explosions. It is highly likely that warehouses and air defense facilities were hit. There are also hits on one of the aircraft parking areas, with a burning helicopter visible, and fuel tanks of Su fighter jets also exploded. SBU sources reported that 125mm tank ammunition was also stored in the ammunition stack immediately behind the Panzer battery that was hit, which is why the secondary explosions lasted so long. So why did Russian air defense fail to respond to such a critical base?
First, it should be remembered that the radar network in Crimea has been forced to operate in 3 different modes in recent months. Sea drones sailing along the Black Sea coast, fixed-wing Bober-class kamikaze UAVs flying completely blacked out, and silent drones resembling flying motorized gliders hovering at low altitude over the Sea of Azov.
The Ukrainians used these 3 layers intertwined on the same night. Defensive Panzer operators see dozens of fake targets on their radar screens, while real payload-carrying bodies cross the line. The second breaking point is that Russia now has to protect 3 fronts in Crimea: the Kerch Bridge Line, the Sevastopol port strip, and internal air bases, simultaneously. Following last month's bridge explosion, part of the Panzer systems were redeployed to the Kerch Strait. The battery at the Khabarovsky runway was therefore operating in a single-barrel configuration, using a backup electro-optical body instead of a thermal camera. The third factor is electronic saturation. The wideband noise jammer deployed by the Ukrainians in the first minutes of the night blocked Russian IFF query response signals, forcing the Toram 2KM long-range systems to remain silent to avoid the risk of friendly fire. Some of the platforms used in the operation were designed in Kyiv. To keep pace in the asymmetric missile race, the Buccaneer motor propeller drone, which entered serial production in 2024, has a range of 800 kilometers and a 50 kilos heat fragmentation warhead. The term GPS jamming resistant, mentioned in the SBU statement, refers to this airframe's INS Astro navigation hybrid. It maintains orbital parameters even in the GLONASS Plus, GPS signal-jammed environment over Crimea. To burn the Mi-26, which serve as heavy load carriers, the UJ-22 airborne kamikaze drone was probably used, which has a shorter range but contains armor-piercing steel tandem. This is supported by the wreckage photos, which show traces of explosions embedded in the rotor towers. These operations have begun to strain every link in the logistics chain on the peninsula. With Kerch traffic slowing down, the ammunition supply line has shifted to the Rostov-Taman highway. After 3 Mi-26 heavy transport helicopters involved in highway logistics were destroyed, plans for an air bridge from the Azov coast to the front line have been suspended. This domino effect could push back Russia's artillery ammunition rotation in the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions by at least a week, as Mi-26s are platforms with limited spare parts that can carry 6 tons of 152mm shells in a single sortie. The SBU's statement that expensive equipment is not safe anywhere directly reminds the Kremlin of this calculation. With Russia intensifying its airstrikes on Ukraine and civilian casualties rising, Ukraine has also increased its drone attacks on Russian territory. According to military officials, in the early hours of June 27th, Ukrainian drones struck 4 Su-34 fighter jets at the Marinovka airfield in Russia's Volgograd Oblast. According to initial reports, 2 Russian fighter jets were destroyed in the June 27th attack, while the other 2 were damaged. Russia was using these aircraft to bomb Ukraine. In its latest statement on June 28th, the Ukrainian General Staff said that Russia had lost 420 aircraft and 337 helicopters since it launched its full-scale war in February 2022. Since June 2024, Ukraine has been systematically attacking military air bases in Crimea, including Kharkovsk, with attack drones and missiles. In response, Russia has begun dispersing its aircraft, setting up aircraft dummies, and moving its air defense systems away from the front lines to protect its airfields. Yesterday, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones attacked 5 components of the S-400 Triumph air defense system in an effort to weaken Russia's air defense in Crimea. The operation was carried out by a special unit known as the Ghosts. Meanwhile, Ukraine once again attacked the Kerch Strait Bridge, also known as the Crimea Bridge, which President Vladimir Putin referred to as his career masterpiece in June 2025. Following the attacks on the Crimea Bridge, Russia was unable to use the bridge for railway and road logistics transportation. Previously, this structure was actively used for such purposes, particularly for the transportation of military equipment or weapons. Military expert Anton Mikhnenko suggested that consulting the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces would be more appropriate regarding the current state of the Crimean Bridge following Ukraine's attacks. But, according to info on the internet, he thinks the Russians have started using the railway tracks on the bridge less. Instead, they have to use ferries to move weapons and equipment. Mikhnenko says there are a few reasons for this. The expert stated, "The Crimea Bridge has suffered some damage. Secondly, it is constantly under fire. And thirdly, they are observing the instability of its operation," and noted that the Russians are aware of this. He also mentioned that when there are regular threats of attacks on the bridge, traffic congestion at the entrance and exit points of the Crimea Bridge makes transportation impossible. In other words, they cannot transport anything by motor vehicle, Mikhnenko said. The expert added that there are currently rumors that the Russians are not even allowing cargo transportation across the Crimean Bridge. Finally, Mikhnenko said that the bridge now serves more as a symbol of what Vladimir Putin built for the Russians. One of the most violent attacks on the Crimean Bridge took place in early June with powerful explosions near the bridge. Ukrainian Navy spokesman Dmitry Pletenchuk said the attacks damaged an important and complex part of the structure. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed the attack on the Crimean Bridge at the time, but he said that the structure was not damaged as a result of the SBU's special operation. Ukraine carries out 3 or 4 attacks on the Crimean Bridge every month. According to Ukraine, the latest attack last week was aimed at damaging the bridge's support structure using underwater explosives. Each attack causes the bridge to close, cutting off the main transport artery between mainland Russia and the Black Sea Peninsula for up to 7 hours. Although official information is limited, a channel on the Telegram app is warning drivers not to cross the bridge. This warning was also issued during another recent attack, when Russia's powerful air defense systems shot down Ukraine's unmanned aerial vehicles, causing a shrapnel rain on the bridge. Since Russia took control of Crimea in 2014, in what was seen as a precursor to a full-scale invasion of Ukraine 8 years later, the peninsula has been the focus of conflict between the two countries. Moscow says the takeover corrected a historical injustice and has insisted that any deal in ceasefire talks in Istanbul must include international recognition of its control. Ukraine, meanwhile, has vowed never to give up its claim. President Trump, who has been trying to end the war in Ukraine, has weighed in on the debate, suggesting that any peace deal could include Washington recognizing Crimea's sovereignty. Overall, the war has reinforced the changes in life in Crimea that began with the annexation and isolated the peninsula as a scenic but unstable beach resort, largely restricted to Russians. The majority, who support the slogan "Crimea is ours," named after the Kremlin slogan celebrating the annexation, tend to dismiss the conflict as a nuisance. In particular, members of Crimea's indigenous Tatar minority, who have long accused Russia of systematic oppression, argue that the war has made Crimea less free, less cosmopolitan, and much less hospitable. There is no freedom, no right to vote, and on top of that, it's not safe, said Irina, a 35-year-old Yalta resident, who, like dozens of others interviewed for this article, declined to give her full name for fear of legal reprisals. It's like bingo, but in a bad way. It's a situation that people didn't choose, but have to live with. With its palm trees and pebble beaches, Crimea has long been a summer resort reminiscent of southern France. Before Russian control, around 6 million Ukrainians and Russians visited Crimea every year. But this number fell after the annexation and declined rapidly with the occupation. Some critics said that exploiting tourists was the most important thing for Crimeans. If America came and said, "You're now an American state," they'd probably ask, "Will there be a tourist season?" Irina complained. Some of Russia's biggest failures in the war have been in Crimea. Repeated drone attacks forced the Russian Navy to abandon Sevastopol, its main port for more than 220 years, and seek refuge in distant Caucasian ports. This year, due to security concerns, the city canceled its May 9th Victory Day parade for the third time in a row. The Kerch Strait Bridge was partially closed for 4 months after Ukraine severely damaged it with an explosive-laden truck in October 2022. Now, every vehicle is checked before passing, and some residents say it feels like an international border. This year, there are signs that tourists will tend to ignore the war. According to a Telegram channel monitoring the bridge, on May 1st, a holiday, thousands of vehicles waiting to cross caused a 6-hour traffic jam. Visitors are gathering on the southern coast, far from Ukraine's usual military targets. Ekaterina, who owns a small hotel, said guests often ask about drones and are worried about crossing the bridge, but they come anyway. She noted that several hotels have been built around her hotel. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, in June 2024, fragments of a missile fired from Ukraine caused numerous civilian casualties. A witness said that people still went to the beach the next day, but wore name tags in case ambulance crews identified them. While residents of Sevastopol described themselves as accustomed to endless air raid sirens, people in larger cities such as Simferopol and Yalta said that drones flew relatively rarely in the sky. Igor, an 85-year-old philosophy professor who lives near the Nakhimov Naval Academy, said he heard explosions almost every night, but waited out the attacks cradling his Yorkshire Terrier, adding that he couldn't sleep if he ran to the shelters every time the siren sounded. Residents said military vehicles filled the streets and large billboards called on men to enlist in the army. Ultimately, the explosions that lit up the night sky also wounded Crimea's claim to be an untouchable fortress on the psychological front. Videos posted on social media show people in Feodosia and Kerch rushing into apartment building hallways without waiting for shelter warnings as sirens wail, a scene that until late 2023 had been common only in Odessa. Russia's most significant territorial gain in the war was the area along Ukraine's southern coast, connecting Crimea to the Russian mainland 350 miles to the east. When the bridge was attacked, a new road provided an alternative route, but some people disliked the repeated military checkpoints. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians left the peninsula, And although the exact numbers are unknown, there was a wave of Russian immigration from the mainland. In 2022, there were more than 1.5 million Russians in Crimea. However, as Ukraine's attacks on Crimea intensified, it was unofficially reported that at least 100,000 Russians left Crimea.
As the war between Ukraine and Russia continues, Russian targets in Crimea are likely to remain a priority for the Ukrainian military.
Despite the discomfort felt by the Crimean population, it appears there is no alternative to Ukraine's efforts to restore its territorial integrity. The destruction of the Kharkovsky base represents more than just the loss of 3 helicopters and a Pantsir system. It signifies the collapse of the weakest link in the Crimean Peninsula's air-ground combined defense concept. Ukrainian drones are now flying not only on the front line, but also deep inside Russian territory, and every fire creates an intelligence gap that facilitates the next attack. This further erodes Moscow's decades-old belief in the security of its rear front. We cannot predict what the coming days will bring, but one thing is certain. The soft beach music of Crimea will be replaced by the sounds of explosions and sirens for some time to come. What are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your opinions in the comments section. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and enable notifications. Thank you for watching.
Russia is one of the most sanctioned countries on earth, and now its own Minister for Economic Development is warning.
Russia is now feeling the heat of war not on the battlefield, but on supermarket shelves. Economy Minister Maxim Reshetnikov's warning that recession is just around the corner has overshadowed even the 15.5 trillion ruble defense budget. In this video, we will examine why the Russian economy is beginning to fade like a carbon stub after the short-term explosive growth period of the war in 3 stages.
First, we will examine how the conflict-driven, arms-centric growth model emerged. Then, the structural obstacles it has encountered. And finally, what the Kremlin's policies, extending even to food coupons, reveal about the state of Russian society and the trajectory of the war.
Russia is now facing a serious test, not only on the front lines of its war against Ukraine, but also within its own economy. Long-standing high military spending, international sanctions, and isolation resulting from the severing of economic ties with the West are increasingly limiting the Kremlin's room for economic maneuver. However, despite the heavy sanctions imposed after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Russian economy initially appeared more resilient than expected. The state allocated huge budgets to military production and expanded the defense industry. Sectors such as military manufacturing, arms shipments, and logistical support to the front lines kept unemployment low and wage increases high. In poor regions in particular, large bonuses and death benefits paid in exchange for military service fueled a short-term perception of prosperity. But this model is now beginning to collapse under its own weight. This is because state resources are increasingly being channeled into military spending, while civilian sectors such as education, health, transportation, and technology are being neglected. The majority of investments are directed toward the defense industry, which is an area with low returns in terms of productivity. At the same time, this approach is causing the country to lose its technology transfer and international cooperation. Sanctions have now targeted strategic areas, such as technology and microelectronics, after the energy and banking sectors. Since local equivalents of many foreign parts and software used in production have not yet been developed, industry is in a bottleneck, especially in advanced technology areas. Signs of this collapse are now coming from official sources. Maxim Reshetnikov, Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation, stated at the International Economic Forum held in St. Petersburg that economic growth figures no longer paint a healthy picture. Reshetnikov's words were noteworthy. The figures show a slowdown, but all our figures are like a rear-view mirror. Looking at the current situation and indicators of businesses, it seems to me that we are already on the verge of a recession. Reshetnikov addressed these words directly to Elvira Nabiullina, governor of the Central Bank of Russia, during his speech. The minister implied that the economic administration should stop taking the situation lightly and called for a little more attention to be paid to the economy. Central Bank Governor Elvira Nabiullina, speaking from the same podium, tried to soften the tone by saying, "We are coming out of overheating. This is a natural cooling." Finance Minister Anton Siluanov was applauded for his metaphor. After every cooling comes summer. But despite these statements, data from the field and assessments by leading economic analysis organizations paint a more pessimistic picture. The latest assessment by the Russian Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting clearly stated that Russia has now entered a recessionary economy. Apparently, a typical recessionary economy has now formed. According to CMASF, the situation in the economy is indicative of structural weakness rather than a temporary correction. This is supported by a sharp decline in private sector investment, fluctuations in industrial production, and production constraints in import-dependent sectors. Today, the unemployment rate is at a historic low of around 2%. Of course, this figure is provided by the Russian authorities. The real unemployment rate remains uncertain. Surveys show that Russian companies are currently suffering from a serious labor shortage and that the war is making the situation even worse. Estimates by research companies indicate that approximately 200,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in the war zone. When the wounded are taken into account, the total number of casualties rises to 800,000. In addition, hundreds of thousands of Russians have fled the country to escape the war. In other words, skilled workers are either fighting, dying, or fleeing the country. Western sanctions have cut Russia off from global markets, increased import costs, and made it nearly impossible to procure high-tech components or even basic goods without paying a premium. The situation for the working population is even more critical. In May and June, metallurgical workers and railway technicians in Sverdlovsk, Novosibirsk, and Ufa launched a silent strike over low wages, delayed bonuses, and compulsory overtime. Railway materials sent to the Ukrainian front were accumulated for 5 days. The Ministry of Internal Affairs detained 280 people on charges of unlawful assembly. This was the highest number of arrests of workers recorded since the Prigozhin uprising in August 2023. The Bryansk Tire Factory, a subcontractor of Yekaterinburg's Uralvagonzavod, the Murmansk shipyards, mostly in the form of walkouts. Fears of privatization are even coming up in wage negotiations. Regions close to the Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk fronts are economically locked down due to fears of flying bombs. Agricultural exports have been cut off. Tourism is at zero. People call it trench sectarianism. Those closer to the front speak less, but the economic data does not lie. Defense spending will reach 7.2% of GDP in 2025. The money that should be used to feed children and repair dilapidated apartments is now being used to buy tanks that Ukrainian farmers will collect as scrap and parts next summer.
The central bank has raised interest rates to 21% to curb inflation, which is officially 9%, but closer to 22% if you count what ordinary Russians actually buy.
Potatoes have risen by 81%, cabbage by 37%, and butter by 36.5%. This gives us the guns and butter curve. The guns and butter curve shows the fundamental economic balance between military spending and civilian welfare. Every ruble spent on tanks is a ruble not spent on food, healthcare, or infrastructure. In Putin's Russia, this balance has turned into a death spiral. Defense now consumes more than 7% of GDP, while inflation for basic goods is rising and shelves are emptying. The regime's obsession with military power is destroying the civilian economy, echoing the Soviet collapse, where no amount of weapons could compensate for a population that couldn't afford butter. What's more, the distribution of food stamps shows just how bad the civilian economy is. Food stamps are a humiliation for any government that claims to be a global power. They are an implicit admission that the market cannot deliver and that the state must intervene to prevent starvation among its own people. In Russia, the symbolism is even more poignant. Because the last time food stamps were necessary, the country was on the brink of collapse. Its empire was disintegrating. It was emerging from a brutal and exhausting war, and its people were facing a precipice of uncertainty and deprivation. So, for those who don't know, what are food stamps? The food coupons proposed by Russia are electronic cards to be issued to low-income citizens starting in 2025, allowing them to make state-approved grocery purchases, excluding alcohol and tobacco. Unlike ration cards linked to shortages during the Soviet era, this system aims to address inflation-driven poverty and support local agriculture under sanctions. In essence, the Russian food card, the modern version of food coupons, functions as a digital voucher loaded with state-funded credits and can only be used at approved retailers for essential grocery items such as bread, dairy products, and vegetables. Some commentators will say, every country is facing inflation. Food coupons are just a pragmatic response. This is a comforting lie. Russia is not Belgium or Canada. It is a country at war, both abroad and at home. Inflation is not an accident. It is the direct result of choices made in the Kremlin. Choices of conquest over comfort, guns over butter, control over freedom. Food stamps are not a technocratic solution. They are a symptom of a deeper disease. If you want to know where Russia is headed, don't look at GDP figures or parades of new tanks. Look at the supermarket checkout where a pensioner is struggling with their food card, wondering if they can afford a loaf of bread. This is the real state of the country. This is the true measure of power and failure. So, what does the return of food coupons in Moscow tell us? It tells us that the war is being fought not only in the trenches of Ukraine, but also in the kitchens and wallets of ordinary Russians. It tells us that the state is ready to sacrifice the welfare of its own people for the sake of military victory. It tells us once again that the ghost of 1991 is haunting the Russian soul. It is a reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, can survive if it cannot feed its own empire. Food coupons are a sign to both the people and observers that the state prioritizes survival over prosperity. Another issue is Russian oil. Faced with the latest increase in the price of Ural crude oil, the Russian government has struck a tone that oscillates between cautious optimism and constant concern. BCS Bank analysts attribute the approximately 15% jump in Ural oil to the outbreak of hostilities between Israel and Iran. This is, at least on paper, a gain for the Kremlin's budget. Still, even this huge increase has not healed deeper financial wounds. The government's original budget assumed that Ural's oil would fetch 87 Dauerman per barrel. This was later lowered to $68.90, but despite the recent recovery, prices remain below these targets. Official statements reveal that the government remains tense. The Ministry of Finance reports that, despite Ural's oil averaging around $76-70 in the first quarter of 2025, oil and gas revenues fell by 10% year-on-year, with the shortfall reaching 34% by May. The Kremlin's revised estimate expects to collect 8.3 trillion rubles in oil and gas taxes this year. This is 2.6 trillion rubles less than initially estimated. The strengthening ruble further blunted the benefits of higher oil prices and kept Kremlin revenues under pressure even as global prices rebounded. While Russian officials welcome the market recovery, they are well aware that their financial position is precarious and that the upturn is fueled by external shocks rather than any policy victory. The new high prices are based on shock and fear.
As the shocks pass, prices will quickly fall back to more normal market rates.
According to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin is presenting the situation to the public as extremely turbulent, tense, and emotionally overloaded. Peskov recently emphasized that Moscow is closely monitoring the markets. Peskov attributed earlier price declines to US tariffs and global market volatility, but the underlying message is the same. Russia's budget remains vulnerable, and the latest price hike, while welcome, has not restored the Kremlin's sense of security. In other words, the short-term explosive growth of the war economy is now facing a severe slowdown. Defense spending exceeds 7% of GDP, interest rates are at 21%, and core food inflation is above 20%. Reshetnikov's warning of a recession threshold is a real alarm bell, despite Nabiullina's talk of a natural cooling. Siluanov's optimism that after every cooling comes summer is far from comforting for consumers facing the winter cold. Russia faces three scenarios. The first scenario is to curb domestic demand without cutting frontline spending and accept stagflation. The second scenario is to restore the defense civilian budget balance and focus on technology and human capital, which requires political will. The last scenario is to continue the military mobilization model, accepting a long recession. The first two options mean policy change, while the third means deeper social costs. The Kremlin's 2025 budget has already answered the question, tanks or butter? Tanks. However, if even potatoes cannot replace butter, this choice is no longer sustainable. The shadow of the Soviet collapse is still long. Empires are not destroyed by conquest, but when they can no longer feed their populations. The pensioners carrying food coupons in Moscow's markets today may be writing the economic map of tomorrow. What about the Ukrainian economy? The Ukrainian economy is actually in relatively good shape given the current war. The Russian attack in 2022 reduced Ukraine's GDP by 29%, but it rebounded impressively by 5.5% in 2023. Last year, Ukraine's GDP grew by 3%, but growth is likely to slow to 1.5% this year.
Any visitor to Ukraine can withdraw cash from an ATM BIM or pay in stores using an international credit card.
Countries embroiled in major wars often experience price controls, shortages of goods, and rationing, but none of these exist in Ukraine. Instead, stores are fully stocked and restaurants are crowded. Everything is operating as usual. How is this possible? The main answer is that Ukraine's state institutions are much stronger than anyone expected.
This is especially true of the Ministry of Finance, the National Bank of Ukraine, and the state financial services.
After 2022, Ukraine's state revenues increased sharply. At the same time, Ukraine continued to make progress in the fight against corruption during the war. When Russia's invasion of Ukraine first began in 2014, Ukraine ranked 142nd out of 180 countries in Transparency International's annual Corruption Perceptions Index. In the latest edition, Ukraine rose to 105th place. Rising Ukrainian patriotism helped fuel this progress in the fight against corruption. EU accession aspirations and IMF conditions were equally important. Ukraine has passed 8 quarterly reviews of its 4-year IMF program. It did so on time and successfully. The same was true for every EU assessment. Looking ahead, 3 critical factors are necessary for Ukraine's future economic progress in the aftermath of the war. First and foremost, Ukraine needs approximately $42 billion in external budget financing per year, or just over 20% of annual GDP, to finance its budget deficit. The country was unable to secure sufficient financing in 2022 due to the failure of EU partners to deliver on their pledges. This pushed Ukraine's inflation rate to 27% at the end of 2022. The Ukrainian budget was fully financed in 2023 and 2024 and reduced inflation to 5%. The budget will be fully financed this year. The second factor is Ukraine's maritime trade through its Black Sea ports. Since September 2023, following Ukraine's withdrawal of most of Russia's Black Sea fleet, shipments from Odessa and neighboring Ukrainian ports to global markets have been almost completely unimpeded. The vast majority of Ukraine's exports are commodities such as agricultural products, steel, and iron ore, which are only profitable with cheap sea transport, so keeping sea lanes open is vital. The third important factor for Ukraine's economic outlook during wartime is a stable electricity supply. Russia's bombing of Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure significantly disrupted electricity supplies in 2024. This was one of the main reasons for the country's deteriorating economic performance. Ukraine's economic situation looks set to worsen this year. Economic growth was only 1.1% in the first 4 months of 2025, while inflation rose to 15.9% by May. The main reason for rising inflation is labor shortages. The national bank will likely have to raise its current interest rate of 15.5%, which will further slow growth. After 3 years of war, Ukraine's economy is showing increasing signs of exhaustion. As expected, the country has entered a period of stagnant inflation. Economically, this is currently a balanced war of attrition. Ukraine's Western partners have the potential to turn the tables on Russia if they want to. Ukraine has successfully established a large innovative arms industry. What is lacking is not weapons, but funds. The West needs to increase Ukraine's military budget from the current $100 billion per year to $200 billion. If they agree to seize the approximately $200 billion in frozen Russian assets held at Euroclear Bank in Belgium, they can do so without using their own funds. This could enable Ukraine to spend more than Russia and achieve victory through a combination of greater firepower, larger technology, and superior morale. Thank you for watching. With every strike of a hammer bomb, it's not just a building that falls. It's Russia's invincible legend that crumbles. A munitions depot in Donetsk, a secret headquarters in Kursk, a command center just across the border in Belgorod. These cylinders are AASM Hammer, France's smart munitions, which equips a classic bomb with a digital brain and strikes targets from 70 kilometers away. Since Ukrainian pilots fitted these French missiles under the wings of their Su-27 and MiG-29 jets, the Russian army's rear lines are no longer considered secure. Tactical headquarters, ammunition depots, and radar centers are erased from the map in seconds. The command chain is severed by a single bomb. What makes the hammer so deadly? How did Kyiv manage to integrate Western technology into Soviet-made jets and shatter Moscow's claims of air superiority? Let's delve into the technical secrets of the AASM Hammer and its psychological impact on the battlefield to uncover this game changer. June 23, 2025, Donetsk. A reconnaissance UAV belonging to the Ukrainian Air Force was on a circular patrol flight off the coast of Velika, Novosilka, south of Donetsk. The image transmission system focused on a simple building outside the village. This was no ordinary structure. It was being used by Russian forces as an ammunition depot. When the operation was approved, air superiority had been established over the area. A Su-27 fighter jet belonging to the Ukrainian Air Force was dispatched to the area. The aircraft had 2 AASM Hammer missiles under its wings. They looked like classic bomb bodies with digital brains attached. The aircraft approached while maintaining altitude. The guidance data was being transmitted live by the UAV. Before the sound could be heard from above, the decision was made. Release. The Hammer missiles glided from the wings. Seconds later, the target was hit. The first explosion was direct, but the real impact came from the chain reaction of munitions hidden inside the building. The structure was destroyed in seconds. Then, a thick white cloud of smoke rose meters into the sky. After the operation was complete, the UAVs made a second observation flight over the area. Nothing remained on the ground but debris. June 20th, 2025, Kursk. The 225th Intelligence Assault Group of the Ukrainian Armed Forces received critical intelligence about the Kursk region in the early hours of the morning. It was determined that the Russian army was using a building in the village of Tyotkino, near the border, as a tactical headquarters. Communication traffic and observations made by unmanned aerial vehicles confirmed that the building was being used not only by an engineering team, but also by active combat personnel. The concrete structure of the building, the military transport vehicles nearby, and the constant movement of personnel indicated that this was more than just an ordinary logistics point. The command center handed over the mission to the Ukrainian Air Force. The ammunition selected for the operation was the AASM Hammer. A Ukrainian Su-27 fighter jet took off in Ukrainian airspace and turned north. The guidance data had been preloaded. The coordinates marked by the UAVs were synchronized with the Hammer's navigation system. Another aircraft prepared for the second wave was 40 seconds behind. 2 AASM Hammer bombs were released. Both were guided to strike at different angles to cause simultaneous destruction. The first hit directly shattered the roof. The second pierced the southern wall. The headquarters was blown to pieces. The ammunition and generator fuel inside the building fueled the explosion. Concrete blocks, roof panels, and support columns were thrown into the sky. The sound of the explosion echoed around Tyotkino. A huge cloud of smoke rose into the sky and began to spread slowly several hundred meters above. Thermal cameras detected no thermal traces of anyone still alive in the target building.
The roof of the building was gone. The interior had completely collapsed.
There was no chance of rescue for the personnel. As drones scanned the area a second time, Russian emergency response units were seen unable to enter the area. Another command center disappeared in the smoke. June 16, 2025, Belgorod. Units of the Infantry Assault Command affiliated with the Ukrainian Armed Forces began monitoring enemy activities near the village of Kazinka in the early morning hours. Intense personnel movement was observed in a building approximately 2 kilometers beyond the borderline. Drones detected communication antennas around the structure. Thermal images showed that the temperature inside was not stable, but continuously increasing. Intelligence units confirmed that the building was being used as a temporary command center by Russian forces. Later, a MiG-29 fighter jet belonging to the Ukrainian Air Force entered the airspace. The aircraft was carrying 2 AASM Hammer missiles in its modified payload bay. The MiG-29 approached the target at an altitude of 5,000 meters. The target was confirmed one last time with live footage provided by the UAV. Following orders from the command center, the 2 AASM Hammer missiles were launched one after the other. The first bomb pierced the roof of the building and exploded inside. The second passed through the wall and caused destruction in the main structural supports. The explosions triggered each other. The entire building collapsed in seconds. The dense cloud of smoke and dust rising into the sky was visible to the naked eye from local observation points. Fragmented concrete blocks scattered across the area, with debris spread over a 30-meter radius. None of the Russian personnel inside survived. Drones' thermal observations detected no moving heat sources in the first 5 minutes of investigation. Radio communication within the headquarters fell silent. The tactical unit chain of command was cut off. Thus, the operation was completed. So how are these operations affecting the Russian army? Ukraine's air operations are creating chaos, especially in the Russian army's chain of command. Officers at the battalion and brigade levels, left without orders on the field, may resort to panic responses, such as a total retreat or uncontrolled attacks. As the morale of the soldiers rapidly declines, Russian commanders are realizing that their positions, which they believe to be secret and secure, are actually under Ukrainian surveillance. Each bombardment cuts off the logistical lifeline of Russian troops, disrupting the delivery of fresh ammunition and supplies.
As a result, despair and disorder are emerging behind the front lines.
More importantly, there is the psychological dimension of these attacks. Russian propaganda, seeking to keep alive the once invincible myth, constantly repeated the theme of air superiority. But with Ukraine bringing in Western equipment, the dream of Russian aircraft gaining complete control of the skies is being shattered. The destruction of Russian positions by French-guided munitions is shattering Moscow's myth of air superiority over Ukraine. What do we know about the AASM Hammer bombs that have become the Russian army's nightmare from Kursk to Belgorod, from Donetsk to other front lines? The 600 AASM 250s delivered to Ukraine by the end of 2023 are not just ammunition support, but a game-changing force multiplier that is transforming the nature of war. These munitions, developed by France's leading defense firms Safran and Dassault, are high-precision air-to-ground weapon systems with modular designs that can be adapted to different mission profiles. Ukraine has begun using this system not only on Western aircraft, like the Mirage or Rafale, but also by integrating it into its own Su-25 attack aircraft. This detail clearly demonstrates Kiev's ability to successfully integrate Western technology into its existing platforms. The AASM Hammer consists of an intelligent guidance system mounted on a conventional bomb casing. This system, which relies on a combination of GPS and inertial navigation, can be optionally enhanced with precision-enhancing modules such as laser guidance or thermal imaging. Thanks to this design, the bomb can successfully strike both stationary targets and moving targets. It is also notable for its range. Some variants of this weapon can be effective up to 70 kilometers, enabling combat aircraft to strike high-value targets without penetrating enemy air defense systems. This feature places the AASM in the same league as the US's JDAM-ER, or AGM-154 JSOW class munitions. The fundamental philosophy behind Hammer is modularity. This means that different warheads, guidance systems, and mission packages can be added to a single munition platform. Whether high explosive or fire-resistant penetrating warheads, they can be configured according to the operational needs of the user country. This flexible structure offers significant advantages for an army engaged in active combat, such as Ukraine. For example, GPS-guided variants can be chosen for long-range strategic targets, while laser-guided short-range versions are preferred for close-range tactical targets. The ability to carry different Hammer configurations on the same air platform significantly enhances the strike flexibility of air power. The Ukrainian Air Force is using these bombs not only to destroy artillery positions, but also high-value targets such as command centers, ammunition depots, and radar stations in frontline areas like Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. Thanks to the precision and impact radius provided by this munition, higher operational success is achieved with fewer sorties compared to Soviet-era munitions. Hammer can be equipped with various sensors, enabling it to maintain its effectiveness under different combat conditions.
Especially in areas with high electronic jamming threats, the INS guidance system activates to provide a security layer against GPS disruptions.
Thanks to advanced targeting systems, target lock-on success is maintained even in foggy weather, night operations, or low visibility conditions. The AASM Hammer was developed to be compatible with the inventories of not just one country, but many NATO countries. In addition to the Mirage 2000 and Rafale, it can also be used on F-16, Eurofighter Typhoon, and even Gripen aircraft, depending on the platform it is integrated into. This makes the weapon not just a national munition, but a strategic system suitable for joint operations. Safran, one of France's leading defense industry companies, unveiled a new generation of the AASM guided munition family at the 2023 Paris Air Show, AASM Hammer XLR. This new model is not only a modernized extension of previous variants, but is also considered a new threshold in the French defense industry's air-to-ground precision strike capabilities. The XLR in its name reflects the phrase extra long range. The most fundamental difference between the AASM Hammer XLR and its predecessors is the innovation in its propulsion system. While the solid-fuel rocket boosters used in previous versions provided short-term high speeds, the XLR model now carries an integrated turbojet engine in its rear section. This gives the munition not only higher speeds, but also long-term guided flight capability. When launched from high altitudes, the range has been extended from the classic AASM's 70-kilometer reach to a range of 150 to 200 kilometers. This allows the mission aircraft to deploy munitions before entering enemy air defense ranges, and enables targets to be reached at greater operational depths. Just like the basic AASM models, the XLR variant also has a modular guidance structure. This structure is available in three main configurations: basic guidance capability and precise positioning in all conditions, thanks to INS GPS navigation. Precise strikes at close range, especially for moving targets, thanks to laser guidance. Infrared seeker head enables target tracking in low visibility conditions and heat-sensitive attack capability. Additionally, the XLR series is configured to be compatible with 250 kilogram and 1,000 kilogram bomb casings. This allows it to be customized for different destruction power requirements. The AASM Hammer XLR is considered not only part of the French Air Force's arsenal, but also a key component of France's defense export strategy. With its modular design, this munition can be customized for different mission profiles, just like previous AASM versions, and is fully compatible with NATO standards. This makes it an attractive option not only for France, but also for its Western allies.
It remains unclear whether this system will be used in the war in Ukraine.
But all this symbolizes France's geopolitical contribution to defense exports through Ukraine. Moreover, France is an indispensable ally for Ukraine in the background. In October 2022, France committed to training 1,100 Ukrainian soldiers in France and attaching them to French units for weeks of intensive training. By January 2023, this effort expanded with the deployment of 150 French trainers to Poland to train up to 600 Ukrainian soldiers each month. These programs have not only increased Ukraine's combat capabilities, but also promoted interoperability, bringing Ukrainian forces into line with NATO standards, which is a critical step toward future NATO integration. The French approach prioritizes sustainability. Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu summed it up succinctly. It is good to have a soldier with a weapon. It is even better to have a technician working alongside him. Focusing on the training of technicians and logisticians enables Ukrainian forces to maintain and repair complex systems such as Caesar and Mistral air defense missiles, thereby extending their lifespan on the battlefield. France's training missions are a force multiplier, enabling Ukraine to build a more professional and NATO-compatible army. This is crucial to counter Russia's numerical advantage. France has supplied Ukraine with a wide range of weapons, from artillery to air defense systems. Between February 2022 and December 2023, France delivered 30 Caesar 100 Falmer self-propelled howitzers and has committed to delivering 6 more by 2025. These mobile precision artillery systems have proven devastating in counter-battery fire, utilizing their 40-kilometer range to target Russian artillery and command centers. Ukrainian crews praise the Caesar's mobility, which allows it to quickly reposition to evade Russian unmanned aerial vehicles and counterattacks. The Caesar excels in several areas. One of them is firing and evading. With its integration of NATO standard 150 mm shells, including precision-guided munitions such as Excalibur, and its ability to perform single-shot, single-kill fire missions, Caesar is the cornerstone of Ukraine's counter-battery operations. The French have also supplied 38 AMX-10 RC light armored vehicles equipped with 105 mm guns. These wheeled tanks provide superior maneuverability, giving Ukrainian forces mobile firepower to strike Russian armor in fortified positions. Although less heavily armored than main battle tanks, the AMX's speed and versatility have proven effective in hit-and-run tactics. French-designed air defense systems are also critical. Paris has supplied Mistral man-portable air defense systems. These include manpads and 2 Croatoling short and medium-range air defense complexes. The Mistral's infrared-guided missiles have successfully shot down both Russian unmanned aerial vehicles and low-flying helicopters. Croatal, or Rattlesnake, has strengthened Ukraine's ability to counter Russian cruise missiles and airstrikes targeting Ukrainian cities and civilians. These systems are particularly effective in protecting critical infrastructure, but their limited numbers limit their strategic impact. Scalp EG cruise missiles supplied by France have enabled the Ukrainian Air Force to achieve performance beyond its capabilities. These missiles, delivered for use on Ukraine's Su-24 aircraft, have now been integrated into French-supplied Mirage 2005 F jets. Paris provided low observable radar heads, and they are performing well. With a range of 250 kilometers, the Scalp enables precision strikes against Russian logistics centers, airfields, and command centers. Attacks carried out by Ukraine using Scalp missiles have disrupted Russia's rear operations, targeting air bases, command centers, and targets in occupied territories. While the Scalp's stealth and accuracy make it a high-value asset, its effectiveness depends on Ukraine's ability to maintain the air operation environment permitted for its launch platforms. Milan anti-tank missiles, with a range of 2,000 meters and wire-guided precision, have proven deadly against Russian armored vehicles. The Milan's shaped charge warhead can defeat the armor of any main battle tank and penetrate more than 500 millimeters of rolled steel armor. These weapons have collectively reduced Russia's operational capabilities, particularly in artillery duels and rear logistics. But Ukraine's need for more reliable, uninterrupted supplies of ammunition and spare parts remains a challenge, especially as Russian forces adapt to advanced electronic warfare and drone tactics. France's renewed €200 million military fund in 2023 enables Ukraine to procure additional equipment directly from French manufacturers. In summary, Ukraine's resilience on the battlefield is not driven solely by determination, but also by France's provision of high-tech equipment, strategic ammunition, and professional training support. From AASM Hammer to Scalp cruise missiles, Caesar howitzers to Mistral air defense systems, French contributions have enabled the Ukrainian army to become a powerful force both on the tactical battlefield and in strategic depth. This contribution is complemented not only by ammunition, but also by integration, sustainability, and NATO compatibility. And today, every hammer that explodes from Donbas to Kursk targets not just a building, but Russia's dream of control and supremacy. Thank you for watching.
That single spark that pierced the darkness of the Black Sea dealt another blow to the 240-year-old Russian naval legend. The Bayraktar TB2 took center stage. The Russian landing ship off the coast of Kherson was turned into a ball of flames, and the Kremlin's untouchable fleet suffered another 85% loss.
So how did this critical attack take place, and how safe is the Russian Black Sea Fleet really? High-resolution footage of the moment of the explosion, the TB2's laser targeting, the secret maneuvers of the Magura boats, and Ukraine's secret tactics. It's all in this video. Now we reveal the behind-the-scenes story of the collapse and retreat of Putin's Black Sea Fleet, from the Moskva disaster to Novorossiysk and the present day. Before you start, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like our video to stay up to date with our in-depth analysis and content.
The Ukrainian Navy announced on June 24, 2025, that it had destroyed a Russian Black Sea Fleet landing ship carrying Russian soldiers off the western coast of the Kherson region.
Admiral Oleksiy Nezhpapa of the Ukrainian Navy shared video footage of the attack and announced the news. Admiral Oleksiy Nezhpapa said, We destroyed another Black Sea Fleet landing ship sailing off the western coast of the Kherson region. I thank our sailors for their successful mission. Together for victory." The video shows the boat approaching a shallow coastal area before being hit and then breaking apart in the water. The exact date of the attack has not been disclosed, and the class of the Russian vessel cannot be definitively identified in the footage. However, the distinctive interface visible in the video suggests that the attack was carried out by a Bayraktar TB2 UAV. Earlier, Denmark deployed maritime unmanned aerial vehicles to monitor Russian naval movements in the Baltic Sea and enhance its maritime surveillance capabilities against potential threats. Autonomous ships equipped with advanced sensors provide real-time intelligence and have been operating in cooperation with NATO allies since mid-2025. The loss claimed by Kiev marks the latest blow to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which has been targeted throughout Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine's successful drone and cruise missile strikes against the ships have forced Russia to move part of its valuable Black Sea Fleet from its port in Crimea, which it annexed, to another location to avoid further losses. In a statement regarding the attack, the Ukrainian Navy stated, "The naval forces destroyed 20 Shahed drones and 1 Russian Black Sea Fleet vessel. Last night, using the capabilities of the Ukrainian Navy, 20 Russian kamikaze drones, Shahed 136, were shot down, and 1 Russian Black Sea Fleet vessel was destroyed." This strike was not only the end of the 3-year drone missile era, but also the beginning of a new chapter. With the echoes of the explosion still ringing in our ears on the Black Sea horizon, the centuries-old pride of the Tsarist Navy is being buried under the waves. On June 24, 2025, the Bayraktar TB2 that struck off the western coast of Kherson did not merely blow up an amphibious assault ship. It also set fire to the myth of the 240-year-old Russian Black Sea Fleet. The Ukrainian Navy proved with its own eyes how a country without even a navy could bring an ocean giant to its knees. The power that comes to mind when one thinks of the Black Sea Fleet was actually the hull memories of Soviet-era ships. At the beginning of 2022, the fleet had 74 warships. Around 20 of these could carry cruise missiles, and 6 could approach amphibious landing targets with a full combat load. Putin's dream of landing in Odessa was also contained within this framework. However, within the first 2 months, the ports were mined. The Bastion batteries stationed on the coast caught the Slava-class cruisers within range, and the inferno of the Moskva flashed across the screens. The loss of a flagship, something the US Navy had not experienced since Pearl Harbor, threw Russia back into the 20th century. It all began on April 14th, 2022, with the explosion of the Moskva cruiser in the misty waters of the Black Sea. 2 anti-ship missiles fired by Ukrainian Neptune batteries on the coast engulfed the 12,000-ton Soviet-era behemoth in a short-lived inferno. The Moskva was the first flagship lost by the Russian Navy since the Japanese War, and the incident buried the mantra, "The Black Sea Fleet is superior to us," in history overnight. Following the Moskva disaster, Kiev chose to cleverly compensate for its lack of classic naval power. Magura V-5 surface drones, Sea Baby long-range kamikazes, and Mamaeus armed with electronic warfare capabilities took the stage. The first unmanned wave attack on Sevastopol in October 2022 made Russian officers who thought they would be sitting on concrete pier chairs until May morning forget the concept of an inner harbor. The damage to Grigorovich-class frigates and a minesweeper rewrote the rules of the game in the Black Sea. The burning of the Moskva forced the Kremlin to order the withdrawal of its ships from Crimea. This withdrawal was glossed over with elegant phrases such as strategic rotation, but in reality, every Magura V-5 drone that fell on the dry docks of Sevastopol was wearing away their patience. Russia moved the heart of the fleet to Novorossiysk on the Caucasian coast. The problems did not end with the withdrawal. Logistics routes lengthened, ammunition shipments slowed, and maintenance and repair costs doubled. Ironically, Novorossiysk, which they had deemed a safe harbor, became the target of Sea Baby maritime drones in August 2023. Longer-range boats codenamed Sea Baby entered Novorossiysk Bay in August 2023 and struck the 3,000-ton Olenigorsky Gornyak landing ship. The ship's hull was tilted to one side and pulled to the quay, but it never sailed again. Then, on the night of December 26th, the Novocherkassk amphibious vehicle was hit in Feodosia. When Russia entered the war, it had 6 landing ships. More than half of them are now either sunk or beyond repair. Ukrainian engineers have given these ships mischievous nicknames in reference to History Department graduates: Magura, Carpathian Mountain Fairy, Sea Baby, and Mamai, Steppe Knight. These octopus-like fiber composite boats are as cheap as a commercial drone brain mounted on a jet ski. When equipped with 200 kilo of explosives, a kamikaze dive algorithm, and a Starlink antenna, they can even intimidate Russia's $180 million Grigorovich-class frigate. Speed? 90 km/h. Radar signature? Smaller than a fishing lantern. The main factor shaping the picture was the technology race that began after the Moskva disaster. Then comes the anti-ship missile arsenal. The Ukrainian-made R-360 Neptune, the British-made Storm Shadow, the French-Italian joint venture Scalp EG, and the US ATAM's Block Partially Land-to-Sea kit. Calling this a coastal battery orchestra would not be an exaggeration. When the trigger is pulled, the 190-kilogram penetrating steel warhead appearing on the Black Sea horizon turns the Russian assault boat into a heap of scrap metal. Ukraine, with Western support, deployed Storm Shadow, Scalp EG, and ATACMS missile packages. These systems struck radar, depot, and air defense batteries in Crimea from a range of over 250 kilometers. The gap in the radar network expanded the maneuvering space for Magura swarms. Bayraktar TB2s taking off from land shared the target coordinates of the Sea Baby boats, while drones flying over the sea returned and sent live video. Thus, an attack on a landing ship became not just a munition strike, but a coordinated choreography of different platforms transmitting data to each other. The ports to which Russia withdrew its fleet did not offer a long-term solution either. By the end of 2024, a de facto exclusion zone had been established in the northwestern quarter of the Black Sea. Russian ships are unable to enter this 25,000 km2 area. Land forces waiting for support from short-barreled artillery are now limited to small patrols in the sheltered waters of the Sea of Azov. Despite this defensive posture, the Russian Navy can still fire cruise missiles. However, the number of launches has decreased to 1/3 of previous levels. The depletion of caliber stockpiles, combined with production delays due to sanctions, means that firepower in the Black Sea is no longer as continuous as before. Military math. What are 28 ships? To an outside observer, one might say, what's 28? Moscow still has a world fleet of 270 ships. But the Black Sea is closed like a lake. The Montreux Convention has locked the door to foreign warships with a key dating back to 1936. On the third day of the war, Turkey invoked Article 19 of the Montreux Convention to close the straits, dashing Russia's hopes of reinforcements from its northern and Pacific fleets. The only remaining option, the existing platforms in Crimea. A third of those are now little more than scrap heaps. Thus, Russia's share in the attack vector equation in the Black Sea was reduced by 85%.
85% means a 2/3 reduction in the number of caliber cruise missiles, the loss of almost all amphibious assault ships, and the remaining frigate Benchine corvette team being too afraid to enter range.
This opened up the Ukrainian port corridor. Grain ships leaving the Odessa-Istanbul line exceeded 1 million tons in February 2024, causing world wheat prices to fall by 17% in 3 months. The results are noticeable on the economic front. When Russia withdrew from the grain agreement brokered by the United Nations and Turkey in the summer of 2023, it aimed to put pressure on the port of Odessa. But thanks to the retreat of the fleet and Ukraine's clearing of the mine corridor, grain convoys resumed in September 2024. Currently, 2 shipments are passing through the Black Sea every day, world wheat prices are falling, and Russia's export insurance premiums are rising. The increase in freight insurance alone is costing Moscow's budget $1.2 billion a year. The loss of naval superiority is also affecting the land front. Russian troops used to be supplied with fuel and ammunition by a combination of ships and rivers, but now they rely on truck convoys. The convoys have to travel on roads threatened by HIMARS. Explosive drone attacks are delaying the flow of logistics, armored vehicles are arriving late at the front, and artillery batteries are reducing their firing rate. Russia's promise of a naval renewal looks good on paper.
However, with a large portion of the 2025 defense budget going toward compensating for losses on land, new frigate projects have been postponed.
The designs for the lighter-class destroyers at the Zvezda shipyard have been shelved, and the mass production of hypersonic Zircon missiles has been delayed due to a shortage of electronic components. Putin's statement in July that "we will strengthen ourselves with modern threat detection systems" was nothing more than a slogan without a financing plan. All of this points to the evolution of naval warfare. Low-cost, high-intelligence swarms are wearing down expensive armor. A Magura boat costs approximately $250,000, while a Grigorovich-class frigate costs at least $180 million.
A TB2 attack, along with its ammunition and personnel, can sink millions of dollars into the water in minutes.
NATO countries are installing new protocols for close defense systems in Portsmouth, Norfolk, and Toulon, as similar threats are expected to echo in the Baltic, Pacific, and Red Sea. The vast blue areas on Kremlin maps are now shrinking with gray lines. These waters, where TB2s, Maguras, and Storm Shadows roam, have ceased to be Russia's untouchable inland sea, and have turned into a testing ground for the unmanned age. Every day, new formulas are being tested in this laboratory. The next morning, another landing ship could be attacked. A logistics train crossing the Kerch Bridge could be targeted by underwater drones, or a frigate undergoing repairs in Sevastopol's dry docks could be set on fire before leaving port. The history of seafaring has never seen such speed and flexibility. The chain that began with the final strike of the Bayraktar TB2 is a long hand in which the cards are being reshuffled in the Black Sea. At the end of this hand, it may take months or weeks to see which side will sink all the ships. For now, it seems that Ukraine has proven that it can win a naval victory even without a navy. Russia, on the other hand, is struggling to embrace a maritime era where intelligence has replaced steel armor. So, can Russia regain its naval power and compete globally? This damage was neither the first nor the last. But Russia continues to make moves not only in the Black Sea, but also in the North Atlantic. Russia's invasion of Ukraine ended the post-Cold War period of low tension and cooperation, and events such as these show how difficult it is for states to monitor their own waters, especially in the Arctic, which is an ocean 1.5 times the size of the US. Satellites are crucial for enabling real-time detection and tracking of activities. In recent years, NATO allies and Russia have increased military exercises in the region. Chinese and Russian warships conducted a joint exercise in the Bering Sea in September. Norway raised its military alert level in October. Since 2005, Russia has reopened dozens of military bases from the Soviet Arctic era, modernized its navy, and developed new hypersonic missiles designed to evade US sensors and defenses. 4 Arctic experts say it would take the West at least 10 years to catch up with Russia's military presence in the region if it wanted to. Meanwhile, strategic shifts, particularly in the Baltic region, have left the fleet in Murmansk almost helpless against a much larger adversary, and NATO is now closer than ever to Russia's northern bases in the Arctic, with its neighbor Finland. Although this depends largely on the outcome of the war in Ukraine and the state of its economy afterward, it seems clear that the Russian Navy should not be a cause for concern for NATO in terms of global naval power. Moreover, without an aircraft carrier fleet, which means no carrier strike groups, the objectives outlined in the latest doctrine will remain largely unattainable for Moscow. Looking at the bigger picture, this could also mean that Russia will be unable to project power into certain regions of the world, such as the Arctic or the Black Sea. At this point, the outlook for the Russian Navy is not very bright. In this regard, NATO should definitely take advantage of this, maintain its commitment to cooperation, and increase its presence at sea if it wants to deter Russian and Chinese expansionist tendencies in world waters.
Given Russia's current situation, there does not seem to be an easy way out.
While Ukraine's efforts against the Russian Navy have been successful, it has also managed to resume grain shipments through the Black Sea. This can be recorded as an important result for both the Ukrainian economy and global grain supply. In other words, despite the theoretical power of the Russian Navy, the Russian-Ukrainian war shows that something is wrong. In summary, Russia's military performance during the war in Ukraine shows that its military power is probably exaggerated. Despite having the world's third largest military budget and considerable power, Russia has not been able to capture much territory and has lost many soldiers and pieces of equipment. The Russian Navy fought against unmanned aerial vehicles and long-range missiles. It has failed to adapt well over 2 years and has proven to be only marginally effective at best. Russia appears to be nothing more than a regional power. It has been fighting for more than 2 years to claim significant territory from its closest neighbor, a neighbor with fewer troops and a less well-equipped military than the larger Russian army. The idea that Russia was a global power before the conflict, or it could be one soon, seems unlikely. Rejuvenating the Russian Navy will be a long and costly undertaking. Even under the best conditions, rebuilding the fleet is a difficult and expensive process. With 3 years of grueling land warfare behind it, it is doubtful that the Navy will be the top priority. Therefore, we can say that we should not wait for the Russian Navy to recover anytime soon. What do you think about this issue? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay informed about new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching. The Russian capital Moscow has once again become the focus of attacks. The Ukrainian armed forces struck Moscow with unmanned aerial vehicles. The attack, which took place at midnight in the capital, caused great concern. As the people of Moscow poured into the streets, the fires caused by the attack lit up the night. We will now head to Moscow to take a closer look at the effects of the drone attacks allegedly carried out by Ukraine on Russia's capital, Moscow. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and turn on notifications. According to a report by the TASS news agency, citing a local official, Ukrainian drones attacked Moscow at midnight on Tuesday, June 24th. Moscow Region Governor Andrei Vorobyov announced that the drones caused a fire on the 17th floor of a building in the town of Krasnogorsk, west of the capital. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin claimed that 2 unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down as they approached the capital. Sergei Sobyanin reported the first one at around 2 a.m. and said that the second one was destroyed 10 minutes later. The mayor said that a third unmanned aerial vehicle targeting the capital was repelled in the evening hours of June 25th. Mr. Sobyanin added that emergency response teams were working at the sites where the debris landed. Following these striking attacks by Ukrainians, a state of emergency was declared in Moscow. Security measures were implemented in the capital in case of possible attacks. Flights were temporarily suspended at Vnukovo and Sheremetyevo airports in the Russian capital Moscow as a result of drone attacks. Behind the suspension of flights and high-level security measures, the people of Moscow were still anxious. Russians complained that they could no longer live safely, even in the capital. But remember, Moscow was again the focus of attacks, according to news reports published on June 12th. In other words, the capital was now accustomed to drone attacks. On that date, Russia was shocked by the news that drones had attacked the resonant production facility in the Moscow region. Russian media reported that following the attacks on the resonant facility, restrictions were imposed on the landing and takeoff of aircraft at Vnukovo and Sheremetyevo airports. As you know, the same airports had suspended flights during the recent attacks in Moscow. The same situation occurred during the drone attacks on Rezonet. Following the impact of the recent attacks on both the facility and the two airports, striking assessments were made by Ukrainian military authorities. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that the airstrike on Rezonet was successful. The General Staff stated that it would continue to take all necessary measures to undermine the military and economic potential of the Russian army and to stop Russia's armed attacks on Ukraine. As we can see from both drone activities, the Ukrainians can attack the capital Moscow at any time they want. So, how is Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin unable to protect his capital? In fact, Moscow and the surrounding central region have always been the most heavily defended areas in Russia. The protection of the capital and the central district is carried out by the 1st Air and Missile Defense Army. The capital's air and missile defense system has a complex structure consisting of 2 layers. The first is the A-135M strategic missile defense system. The second is the S-50M, which includes the Baikal-1 and Universal-1 automatic control systems, S-400 and S-300 PM-2 complexes, and Pantsir air defense units. All of these are supported by various radar stations that enable the detection and guidance of defense missiles. This extensive system array is primarily designed to counter air attacks, cruise missiles, and intercontinental ballistic missile warheads. However, the system's success rate against drone attacks is unclear. Protection against unmanned aerial vehicles has never been the mission of the air defense missile systems serving in the First Army.
Neither the 2021 National Security Strategy nor the 2014 Russian Federation military doctrine identifies unmanned aerial vehicles as a threat to national security.
The concept for the development of aviation defense until 2030, dated April 2, 2019, also does not address countering unmanned aerial vehicles. When commenting on a report on the development of Russian aviation forces in the early days of the war, the Russian Ministry of Defense stated that the modernization of Moscow's missile defense system would be completed by 2023. However, there was no mention of the threat posed by unmanned aerial vehicles. The fact that Ukraine possesses the capability and intent to attack important targets on Russian territory using unmanned aerial vehicles was already evident by the end of last year. In November 2022, Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of the Russian Security Council, called for an increase in air defense forces in the Central Federal District, particularly to protect important facilities. Judging by the recent drone attack in Moscow, it appears that the realization of this vulnerability came too late. Aitek Bizhev, former Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Air Force and head of the independent state's Joint Air Defense System, proposed establishing 24/7 air defense duties at key strategic locations, including the Kremlin, the Defense Ministry, and the Federal Security Service. However, this proposal was not accepted. According to military expert and director of the Air Defense Forces Museum, Yuri Knutov, the reason for this is likely that most of Russia's air defense systems were moved to areas near the Ukrainian border after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In January 2024, the deployment of air defense systems on the roofs of some Moscow buildings also indicated that the Russian military was facing a serious shortage of short-range systems. Meanwhile, it was revealed that the Pantsir air defense systems, also located in the capital Moscow, were largely ineffective in detecting low-speed and small targets, including military unmanned aerial vehicles. Additionally, these air defense systems regularly detected false targets, including large birds flying nearby. The Russian military has developed plans to deploy more Tor-M2 systems to military bases in and around Moscow. However, the Tor-M2 was not a foolproof defense system. This system detected UAVs at distances between 9 and 15 kilometers, 5.5 and 9 miles, with at least a 70% probability. Additionally, the lowest altitude level detectable by the system was between 30 and 60 meters. In urban areas, there is a significant amount of interference, further reducing the likelihood of detecting, targeting, and neutralizing such a target. The success rate of the Tor-M2 in Moscow was even lower. Another important fact is that Russian air defense systems have problems defeating drones in the dark. Another challenge is that Russian air defense systems can only prevent UAV attacks at high costs. This also applies to air defense systems in Moscow. Military theorists at the Russian Ministry of Defense have repeatedly pointed out the low efficiency and unreasonably high cost of defeating unmanned aerial vehicles using traditional methods. Defense is becoming more complicated because UAVs are usually made of plastic and powered by a small metal motor, which gives them a low radar signature. UAVs are difficult to hit from a distance because they fly at low speeds and low altitudes. Additionally, UAVs are easy to maneuver, allowing them to evade radar and air defense systems. Although Russia has been unable to protect even its capital from such risks, Ukraine has been trying to take precautions against UAV attacks since the beginning of the war. Some of these precautions were quite striking. In particular, the emergence of anti-drone teams in St. Petersburg demonstrated the authorities' concerns and the relatively low-tech countermeasures being employed. Another precaution was to impose a complete ban. Moscow authorities completely banned drone flights in the early days of the war. It was discussed that more technological systems would be deployed to protect the capital in the future. Laser and microwave weapons are being developed in Russia, but they are still a long way from being put into service. After hopes for defense slowly faded, the fact that the Russians were unable to properly protect even the capital city of Moscow, and that modern air defense systems have not yet been deployed in the city, has caused great demoralization among the people living there. The recent attacks in Moscow have been the most important factor in igniting massive unrest among the Russian people. Following the UAV attack on the Russian capital, it is believed that other cities are also under aerial bombardment. There is also a threat to life on the streets of St. Petersburg.
However, it seems that there is little the Russian people can do about it.
The reason for this is the repressive regime in the country. Surveillance, which has been carried out over the past 10 years, but especially since February 2022, has played a key role in Putin's intensified political pressure campaign. This pressure prevents people from speaking openly and clearly about their thoughts and feelings regarding politics and life in Russia. Many people oppose the invasion of Ukraine and the repressive policies within Russia and want to express this.
However, openly challenging the positions of Putin's regime can get ordinary people into serious trouble.
Therefore, Russian citizens who believe that the recent attack in Moscow was a mistake on Putin's part can do nothing but remain silent. Alongside silence, anxiety has been a common feeling among the Russian people for a long time. According to polls, over 40% of Russians have experienced shock, fear, and anxiety in response to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Depression and fear have increased since the start of the war. The recent attack in Moscow is likely to reignite these feelings with renewed intensity.
So, what is Russian leader Vladimir Putin doing in the face of growing fears of attacks across the country, including in Moscow?
Putin is likely aware that the situation is spiraling out of control. However, the Russian leader is placing great confidence in his last remaining card. If attacks on Moscow increase and everything in the capital spirals out of control, Russia could play the nuclear card. Putin has already made this threat many times. Some officials in the Moscow regime also support Putin's idea. As you may recall, Andrei Kartapolov, chairman of the State Duma Defense Committee, suggested that Russia should strike Ukraine with the Oreshnik missile. Andrei Kartopolov, who stated that the decision rests with Putin, made incredible statements, saying that launching the Oreshnik missile would not be unnecessary, and that launching more than one would be even better. The Oreshnik IRBM is referred to as a dark threat that Russian President Vladimir Putin has been talking about a lot lately. This medium-range ballistic missile was last seen in Ukraine's Dnipro region. The Oreshnik IRBM, Vladimir Putin's most trusted missile, has become one of the biggest sources of concern for Kiev and the West over time. With Oreshnik's mention in the State Duma's threatening statements, the missile has once again drawn attention. There is some disagreement over whether the Oreshnik meets the accepted definition of an IRBM. The Oreshnik has been classified as a medium-range ballistic missile by Western governments. The Kremlin claims that the missile is unstoppable and poses a serious threat given its speed in reaching its target. The missile moves at speeds of up to 10 times the speed of sound. Capable of reaching 10 Mach, the Oreshnik can travel approximately 2.5 to 3.5 kilometers per second. The missile's maximum range is 5,500 kilometers. Capable of striking a large part of Europe and the western coast of the US, the Oreshnik can reach Berlin in 15 minutes and London in 20 minutes. Despite its name, which means hazelnut tree, the Oreshnik is as alarming as Putin described it. After being launched, the missile accelerates rapidly, using its rocket engines until it reaches the upper atmosphere of the Earth, at which point the first stage rockets, which have exhausted their fuel, are jettisoned. The multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle is then released and moves toward the target area in space. The system's most vulnerable point is when it is moving at its slowest speed. The Oreshnik's 6 warheads can then be independently targeted. This critical feature makes defending against this missile extremely challenging. The targets of the missile, which can carry 6 or 8 nuclear warheads, remain unknown until the last moment. The re-entry trajectory from the edge of the atmosphere creates a speed that makes tracking and intercepting the missile system a challenging task. Russia is aware of this threatening ballistic missile capability. In fact, new plans are already being made regarding the Oreshnik. Putin stated that they will continue testing this missile. In addition, Putin said that Russia could deploy its new Oreshnik medium-range hypersonic missile on the territory of its ally, Belarus. This statement reignited the debate over the controversial deployment of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus last year. Putin said that the deployment of the Oreshnik missile depends on the completion of serial production in Russia. The Oreshnik missiles, which have been integrated into Russia's strategic missile forces, appear to be deployed in Belarus, with local authorities being consulted on target selection. Lukashenko emphasized the strategic importance of the Oreshnik deployment, stating that it would serve as a deterrent against possible aggression. Despite the joint threats from Belarus and Russia, experts hold differing views on the deployment of the Oreshnik missile. Their opinion is based on the systemic shortcomings in Russia's defense industry, which could delay the missile's mass production for years. What would happen if Russia and Belarus proceed with deploying more Oreshnik missiles? This is precisely where the focus shifts to the West's arsenal. The equivalent of the Oreshnik in NATO's arsenal is the Minuteman III IRBM system, primarily designed for the delivery of nuclear weapons. It is unclear whether this missile system can carry and deliver conventional munitions as well as nuclear warheads. On the other hand, Putin's claims about the Oreshnik missile are appropriately theatrical, likely intended to create international political and strategic impact, and as an effort for potential domestic consumption in Russia. Nevertheless, it should not be forgotten that such missiles have been used on the battlefield. In fact, the possibility of adding nuclear warheads to the Oreshnik and firing these missiles toward Ukraine or the West must also be considered. The reason for this is that the world is currently preparing for a nuclear war. Therefore, as Russian Duma official Andrei Kartapolov mentioned following the drone attacks in Moscow, if Putin orders the launch of Oreshnik, the situation could become extremely critical. However, instead of bringing the air defense systems in all cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg, up to an adequate level, there is always the possibility that the Russians will launch more severe attacks with dangerous missiles such as Oreshnik. For this reason, it would be right for Ukraine and the West to remain on high alert in this regard. Kiev is currently trying to increase its production of drones in response to such threats from the Moscow regime. This is because Ukrainian military officials believe that Russia will not resort to nuclear weapons, as long as the red lines are not sufficiently challenged and the West's security is not threatened. Therefore, Kiev's solution is to increase UAV production and intensify attacks on the front lines in order to persuade Russia to engage in peace negotiations. Ukraine currently has the capacity to produce 8 million drones per year for defense purposes. However, there is insufficient funding for this. This information was announced in reference to a speech by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky at the Defense Industry Forum in The Hague. Zelensky said that our defense production potential exceeds $44 billion. This means approximately 1,000 military vehicles, ranging from artillery to advanced unmanned aerial vehicles and advanced combat vehicles. The Ukrainian leader also noted that approximately 40% of the total potential does not have the necessary funding. And this, according to Zelensky, is actually a problem. On this matter, Zelensky said, "For example, we can produce approximately 8 million drones of various types per year, but we only have funding for a much smaller number. If funding is secured, Russia could face a nightmare scenario in terms of drone attacks. In Moscow, further drone attacks could occur in the coming days." Even now, without funding, Ukrainians are doing everything in their power to reach the capacity to produce over 1 million drones. Once funding for future production is secured, it may already be too late for Moscow. Thank you for watching.